date is December 4th, 2019. And the first thing on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody could stand up. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 3 on the agenda is the approval of the Planning Commission agenda for tonight.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Item number 7, discussion, land use versus zoning. Overview by, I gather DJ is Dean, huh?
Yeah, you want me to start briefly, and then you're going to introduce the guests?
I don't.
All right. I have the gift of gab, I can. We have a handout that's on the end of the table, not with the presentation that's being made by others, but I have put together, there's a book for each of you. And I intend to walk through the entire thing later after the presentation. I'll walk through that page by page to give you an idea of the real details between the comp plan and the zoning ordinance. But prior to a presentation for a business opportunity in the community, I just want to reiterate the significance of the comprehensive plan. You picture it or regard it as a long-range document. It's intended by law, when we prepare these, to be a 20-year projection to the future. Well, I don't know how anybody can project 20 years out. Things change way too rapidly, and so we update that by law every 10 years. But the map that gets approved, which the City Council did adopt in the end of October, identifies what guides your zoning in the community. So when a question comes up about comprehensive plan, zoning, or like tonight, a proposal for a particular business, actually the first thing you look at is the comprehensive plan, because we haven't changed our zoning map or zoning ordinance to become consistent with some changes that did take place in the comprehensive plan. So in this is a copy. I know Ben at the last meeting gave you a copy of the land use map, and attached to that was the description of
Rural, residential,
Yep.
mixed use.
Commercial, so you have two things. Pardon?
I need a copy of that.
It's included in my handout towards the end of that document. It has the same thing. It has the same map, the future land use map from the 2019, it's the last 4 pages of the handout. And so there's a description of rural residential, the mixed use districts, the commercial industrial designation. And again, these are land use descriptions, not necessarily zoning district descriptions. So you've got commercial, you've got industrial, you've got commercial industrial, we've got public institutional, which we don't have any zoned, but it is a descriptive item within a plan. That might be your parks, it might be city hall property, things of that magnitude, but we don't choose to zone them differently. So again, when we talk about any new proposals in the community, you need to familiarize yourself and have a copy of that land use map. And we'll go into much more detail briefly or later in the meeting. But we also have a zoning map, and presently we have not amended that map. And so you look at a zoning map to guide the decision about future uses in the community. Well, what's allowed by description in the zoning text itself? So somebody says, I have a commercial business I'd like to bring to the community. Well, which district is it? Where's the property located? It might be the commercial industrial district on Lake Drive. It might be our community retail district closer to the freeway. It might include the commercial showroom district a little further from the interchange on the freeway. Someone might be describing something as commercial, and yet by our description in the ordinance, it's actually an industrial use, or in our comprehensive plan might be identified as an industrial use. So labels are important. People use different labels in different communities. Applicants that come in with something will say, I'm not a distribution business, I'm a retail business. And you have to make those decisions yourselves on the basis of what's written in the comp plan. And again, those descriptions, Pam, are in the back 4 or 5 pages in what I've handed out. And for those of you that may have Ben's handout, it was a little larger map. Otherwise, it's the same information. So when we've got the land use map itself, you tailor the zoning districts according to those broad land use categories. So where our map says commercial, we end up creating commercial zoning districts. And again, we have the community retail, we have the commercial showroom, and they lie entirely within that red description on the land use map that says commercial. Our zoning district will match everything else that shows light industrial as the industrial purple color that's on the map. And then our other primary business zoning district is commercial/industrial, and that's a mix of commercial and industrial uses on Lake Drive. That's the pink category on the land use map. We have some boundaries that we're going to have to adjust as a result of this comprehensive plan, and I'll go into those details. But I just wanted to start the meeting again with the relationship of the comprehensive plan, a long-range document, but has a map, and that is a land use map, different from a zoning map, which is very prescriptive, has very detailed uses that are allowed depending on which particular district it's in. And then you have a final layer on top of this land use matter, and that becomes the performance standards that are required in each of the districts. So that may be things dealing with environmental controls, whether we have public sewer or private sewer. The performance standards include all of the requirements that we have based on what is available for that particular use. So we have different performance standards on Lake Drive, where you have private septic systems, than we have in the sewer district or the freeway corridor. We have a whole different set of performance standards. Other performance standards that you're familiar with, we've been talking about, are design standards. That's just one small component of the broad range of performance standards, which also include setback requirements, building height. It might be a floor area ratio on a particular property, and the site coverage that we allow. So that's just in a nutshell what I'm going to get into on a much more specific basis. But just prior to the meeting, Elizabeth indicated that we were going to have some people come and present a proposal to you. And we'll deal with that, I think, at the next meeting rather than this one. But I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, and you can do your.
So before I lose my internet connection again, so what you have before you today is this was set up as a workshop, but I want to say a week and a half ago, I talked to an applicant, and they had indicated that they had a proposal and they wanted some information. And I said, well, at this point, we were working on the comprehensive plan, and we were working on zoning districts, and I wasn't quite sure where it fit in, but again, they wanted to come in to give you a concept overview. And I talked to Dean earlier, and he said, this might be a really good opportunity for when we talk about the land use plan, the zoning districts, for you to actually have an example, to actually work through. So, so what we thought we would do is the applicant is here, and we thought that they would take you through their presentation. They have a small PowerPoint. You can ask them questions. Then we'll go through Dean's presentation so you can get kind of the theory down about land use and look at those definitions to see how this fits in. And then 2 weeks from now, I have some worksheets and some homework, and we'll go over that. And from there, then at the next meeting, then you can make a formal recommendation to the council. So it's a kind of a 2-week process that we're going to kind of go through to cover it, because I think in this case, you have to understand what the concept that they're presenting, think about the land use plan, see if it fits in and where, and then does it fit in the zoning overall, meaning the use list. And taking you through all those steps, I think will take both meetings for you to kind of think about it. Then you can go out to the site, you can look around, you can see how that might fit in. So with that, I'm going to invite the applicant to come up in the 4 chairs. Again, this is informal, so we're at the big table, you're at the chairs. I'll have you introduce yourselves to the Planning Commission, and 5 members on that side of the table of the Planning Commission. I'm the city administrator, and Dean Johnson is the planner. And while you're, go ahead and have a seat. Once the applicant makes their presentation, there'll be a short presentation by the mayor, and then we'll jump into our workshop. So, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Ron Hagraff is the chair. I know we're at a round table, but go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Yes.
And then we'll move forward.
Okay. Thanks, folks, for seeing us tonight. I'm Sean Coatney with Core Commercial Service. I'm a partner at Core Commercial Real Estate. We're representing horticultural services on a piece of property in Columbus that we want to purchase and move forward. Thanks for your tonight.
So I'm Catherine Nicholson. My husband Trent. We own Horticulture Services. This is Michael.
Sean and I are
Michael's
business
partner.
partners.
Business partner. We're here in support of our client.
Thank you so much for letting us be part of your workshop. You were all very brave to take on something so massive as a comprehensive plan. We're happy to be your sort of guinea pig example on it. So we do have a tiny PowerPoint. I know you've all been looking at it. Thank you for considering it. I would love to walk through it a little bit with you. That's okay. So we're Horticulture Services. We're a landscape and snow removal maintenance company. We serve mostly clients in the east and south metros. A lot of people in Woodbury where there's a lot of townhomes. We do a lot of work at townhomes. And these images here are just some of the examples of the work that we do. There's a rose garden that we take care of in Woodbury. This is another client in Woodbury where we take care of the lawns and the tree trimming, shrub trimming. This is St. Ambrose Catholic Church, also in Woodbury. You hear that the Woodbury theme, most of our clients are in Woodbury. So what we're looking to do is find a permanent location for our business, because right now we're renting. And ideally, we would have a place that's near the freeway, easy access to Woodbury. So the location that we're looking at obviously is just exactly that, easy access to head south. But even more than that, we want to be part of a community where we can invest. If we have a permanent facility somewhere, we want to be part of a community that we feel comfortable in, a community that's welcoming. Trent and I live right over in Scandia, so we're kind of next door neighbors. We want to be part of a community where we can invest in and support the local organizations and just feel good about supporting the infrastructure that the community we're part of has. Like your city park. Our kids, we have 6 children, and they absolutely love your city park. We're part of the homeschool group that meets there on Thursdays. I'm sure you're aware of that. We want to be part of a community where we can hire locally. We're in constant need of employees, and it would be wonderful to be able to hire staff for So obviously, we're looking to construct a permanent facility for our 80-plus employees, where they can feel secure that we're not going to be moving again and suddenly end up 20 miles away from where their homes are, or whatever it might be. So specifically, or primarily, what are we trying to do? We need, or what we need, is a location to house our 35 trucks and 25 trailers. Approximately. And that's what we currently have. And there has to be parking for all of our employees. I referenced we have 80-plus employees. And they all come to our shop every day. So we have to have parking for them. And then room to grow. If we're investing in a permanent facility and we continue our growth model, which we intend, we want to have space to do that on that site, and rather than having to move again. So secondarily, what are we looking for? Temporary, very minimal temporary material storage. We do a little bit of plant installation. Our primary business is the service, you know, the lawn mowing and taking care of the rose garden and the tree trimming. We do a little bit of replacements, so we have to store some plants for a short period. A little bit of mulch, a little bit of compost. You'll see some images on our concept plan for the three-sided storage space and where the parking would be. That'll be at the end of the document. Of course, we get fuel system. It's much more efficient to fuel on site rather than driving down to Woodbury and fueling there. So this picture is the location that we're looking at, right along Freeway Drive. The red hash marks show it's not the entire piece that was for sale. It's just that remaining yellow portion with the two little ponds there. This is just to blow up. There's, on the right-hand side, there's two little sheds that exist right now. So if you drive by there, you'll see that. Down below on the upper left is a picture of one of the neighboring buildings. It's the freeway mini storage. Then on the right, this picture, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's taken right from your website. The little green box there is the property that we're looking at. And on the left, you can kind of see it again. There's a lot of swamp area in the back, but the front is all upland.
Approximately 26 acres, and 8 to 9 acres of it are actually buildable.
So these two images here are actually some other client properties that we maintain. And they're pictures of berms that we felt were representative of what we would want to do. And again, the berm is represented in the concept site plan. So it's manicured turf in the front, plantings in the back to just obscure the parking lot and building and make it more presentable from the road. These are buildings that we like the look, the style, and the construction. They're from the builder that we would likely use. With the office in the front, the shop towards the back. The one on the left is a little more representative because of the landscaping in front. We would have, of course, being a landscape company, of course, we have landscaping. And on the concept site plan, you can see that as well. So here's a picture of our current shop space. The trucks lined up, the trailers, not quite all of them, there's not 25 there that you can see. But, and just for fun, we put in a mowing training day picture. We use the lot in the spring and just have our guys practice driving around the mowers. I have a note there, we don't run semis or full-size dump trucks because again, we're a service. We're not doing the heavy construction. So it's really just the service vans you can see there and pickup trucks.
Are these trailers part of your business, or is it just
The white trailers are part of our, yes, we mostly run covered trailers. So when we say 35 trucks and 25 trailers, the majority of those trailers are the white covered trailer. It's kind of a security and maintenance
Kathy, just a question. If I could ask a question, maybe if the council's thinking about, this is kind of almost a domicile facility, right? These trucks are, they're in the morning and they're out on jobs all day.
Yes.
They come back in the evening and washed and cleaned and,
Thank
gassed
you.
or whatever.
Yes,
Just wanna confirm.
very good point. Yep, so the employees come to the shop, hop in the trucks, and are gone all day.
Employee parking behind there right now. That's what's in the back.
And then in the top of that photo with those white tanks is the fuel system. And those are all at our current location.
Yeah, I think whatever's required.
It's in Centerville. It's just down, basically take Freeway Drive and
It's right on. It's right across the street from Morton Construction, if you know where that is. Yeah, it's right across from that building. Old Baroli Trucking Building, is where they are.
Midwest Creighton shares with us. Yeah, and they donate, they run a small, it's not a huge semi-tanker that our current vendor is using. It's bigger than any of our trucks, but it's not the semi. It's not the size that goes to the gas station.
The largest truck we have is the, just under a CDL, so you don't need it's 25,000 pounds. Two wheels in the back and one dualies in the back.
And that's gasoline that you're storing something else? Diesel and gasoline.
What do you do in the winter?
Snow removal.
They've been pretty busy the last week and a half.
So we're very happy that it didn't snow
Do
today.
you lay off a lot of people though, the 80 people?
We keep as many on as we can, on kind of a half salary over winter.
But not the 80 people. It's just kind of,
Not all 80, and a lot of them are college students or people who just prefer a summer job and have maybe a different
I
arrangement
mean,
in the winter.
grass, there's a lot more grass and snow.
There is. And that's always been a trick for us because we need to keep the same quality people on to do professional service with well-trained people. And so we do have a lot of people who will stick around even at the 20-hour, the half salary.
And then you try to keep on and work on your equipment in the wintertime too and make sure that everything's road ready and ready to go in the spring. You take that time, utilize your people, and keep them on staff.
So we have,
Tree trimming today, like tree trimming, keep you guys busy.
because our work, because we're not construction, we have year-round maintenance contracts. So it's the same, for the majority of our contracts, we have the same revenue year-round. So that's what makes it possible for us to keep a lot of our people on.
So all these vehicles you got here, they're outside. Will they be outside here if you were to build this place?
The vehicles would be outside.
You leave them alone. How big a shop you talking about? 2 stalls,
We have
3?
here 140 or 75 for the whole thing right now. And of course, we would like to have future expansion space that's also on the plan.
So 10,000, approximately 10,000 square feet is what we're looking to build.
Of which you're probably about 2,500 to 3,000 office and the rest would be shop space.
So we have how many office people?
10 to 12, so we have a couple part-time office.
And they need a big conference room for their meetings and their weekly stuff. They have a lot.
And your hours of operation? Not normally? Yeah, normally, so our office is open 8 to 4. Of course, in the summertime, our guys, our shop guys start at 7:30. Some of them start at 7 in the summertime.
You said they all come to this place?
They all come to the
They
shop.
don't go to Woodbury and wait for you to come down?
So we really pride ourselves in our image, and a lot of that means having our vehicles on the site, not employee vehicles on our client properties.
What about security? I mean, you're gonna have a lot of vehicles there at night, are you fencing the whole
Yeah,
area?
so we have on here there's the field approach, and then the
Yes.
parking area.
Here.
After the parking area is a gate, so people can access the office without having to go through a gate. And anything behind the office would be.
That's what we
But
currently,
there's
that's
not
what
a
we
fence
currently have.
that's around the
The front, certainly not in the back.
Okay.
Because that just wouldn't be necessary. There's already a fence along the north side, which is presumably owned by Coates, that fence that was put there. There's not a fence. Is it a good fence? It's just a chain
Brand
link
new
fence.
chain link,
Kind of a basic.
just keeping people out of their rental stuff there.
So then on the plan, kind of towards the bottom middle, is the three-sided storage shed.
That'd be for the materials we would need to
Is
store.
that one right there, correct?
Yep.
That'd be
front.
fa-
Mulch and stuff?
Yeah,
around there?
mulch.
Okay.
A mulch
dirt.
bin, a compost bin, and the three
Facing the
plants
yard? Facing
Yeah.
forward or facing the yard?
facing the
Yeah.
yard. Because
Yeah,
then
face
right
west.
behind, it would be abutting the fence.
Are you planning on bituminous for your parking or are you class 5 or? what are you
Ideally,
planning?
Well,
but
for employee parking, the front parking area is parking area
Yeah,
that,
but I mean the back.
no. Class
That's
five.
five.
the back area would be similar to the photo up above.
Right.
Our mowing training day.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
I don't know if you want them on there, we'll wait, we'll give them a couple days.
No.
How long you guys been in business?
Yeah, so I added this slide on here and
Oh, celebrating
Oh.
30.
realized it wasn't on this one. 30 years.
Okay.
Um,
Family business?
Yes, my dad started the business in 1989 as a way to support the family when he was trying to attend seminary. And then he found that there was such a need for the professional horticulture-focused care of all of these wonderful plantings I can install, that took off. And he found his ministry opportunity to his employees rather than in a church setting. So then Trent and I purchased the business from him in 2014. And we have a lot of staff that have been with us for well over 10 years. We just celebrated the 25th year of one of our divisions this month.
You have any contracts up in the Forest Lake area? Or is it
We
all
do.
south?
We do. Yep, there's a few over in, by the high school that were more the junior high.
Football fields, the new, Fenway football fields.
Yep, along there too.
You do them then? The Fenway?
No,
Not the
there's a-
fields, but
Oh,
the
the
association.
townhouses in there off of
Yeah.
Fenway.
We really try to stick with our town. People care. People who live in townhomes care more than other commercial, because we consider that commercial because it's commercially managed. And when we used to do a lot of retail or just other commercial businesses, and they didn't care. And if our niche is, as we say in our website, bringing professionalism to landscape maintenance, we need people who care about that.
So you fertilize and weed control and everything, and that's all stored on site in drums or what do you?
In, depending on what
I mean,
material it is,
gravel or
yep,
liquids
drums,
or whatever,
bags.
yeah.
I know this is probably a
The-
contract issue, but what do you do with the snow? You haul it out of there? You don't
Depends
have-
on the site.
oh, it does?
Some
I
sites,
mean,
there's
you don't have a dump
space.
truck or nothing? to haul it out?
Normally we don't haul it out, we'll just typically blow it.
Blow it
Maybe
further
push
back.
it into a different spot and blow it back further.
It's really, really expensive for the associations if they have to have hauling done.
Well, I just know Fenway over in that area, when they had a bad snow, they had, I mean, knocking it off the roofs and bringing it down.
Oh, yeah.
And I did, that was it last year?
Yeah,
Last year they were.
And I don't know what they did with all that snow.
Well,
Maybe
they
somebody
left
else
it
do
there
that
for
then,
us to
yeah.
plow away.
There isn't much room over there.
No, there's not.
And townhouses, you
No.
know.
Yeah.
Every piece of inch is worth something.
Yes, it is.
So you never haul it, you just store it on site?
It's mostly blown, if they run out of
No, we
space.
don't haul
it's-
it.
On the, I just wanted to point out on the site plan, if we could scroll up just a So there's the very front there where there's the little green bubble beds. That's the berm, which was in some of the images up above, the concept berm, where it is elevated some, and then the plantings on top of that.
I know it's really in the
Visual concept.
concept here, but are you gonna bring in dirt to make that berm, or are you hauling it off-site?
It would depend on if there was any remedial work that had to happen on the site already, and then just relocate it, otherwise we bring it in.
There's wetlands back there.
Yep.
Wetlands in Columbus.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, yeah, I imagine you have to dig open front as well for runoff, so I was hoping that we could use some of that.
And then also in this concept plan, we can go back down to that. So the other landscape area I wanted to point out is just to the west or the left of the parking area. Yep, the gold being trees and then finished turf underneath that, and then of course landscape beds in front of the office space. Just trying to make it represent what we do on our client properties, represent who we are.
Showcase you when your clients come in, whatever.
And we don't have very many clients who come and visit our property, which is fine. We want it for our employees to be a place where they can feel proud to come in and say, wow, this is our space. This looks good. I love to be here. It's pleasant. It feels secure just because it's permanent and it's attractive. Represents what we do.
Is this also the employee parking area? It says parking area, but so that's where the.
That would be
employee-
employee parking,
Yep.
yeah.
So you really never have customers come to you hardly?
We really don't. Occasionally, some board members at an association will want to come and see what we do, or where we do the shop. But that's pretty rare. I would love it if they did.
Especially with a nice image.
Yes, yes. And maybe they would.
Do it now on Google, right? Google Street
Yes,
View.
right.
Let's get them to drive by soon.
Another thing too, I just want to add is the construction part of it. It'll be a tilt up, good solid, it's not going to be any metal, anything like that. They're going to be beautiful, it's a beautiful building. And those tilt up buildings are not cheap. These guys want to do something very nice, it's going to be their home, as Kathy said, for quite some time, and that's very important. So I know that those tilt up buildings are beautiful.
Have any of you visited our website?
We just looked at it.
Okay, okay, well,
Encourage you to check
if
it
you
out.
are curious about more about who we are, and kind of our values and business philosophy, please do visit the website. And we would welcome any questions outside of this discussion. Yes, it was on the last page. Horticultureservices.com.
Other thing too, I just encourage you, these guys are right down the pike down here too. If anyone's driving around, if they want to kind of check out where they are and what they're doing, see kind of where they are, it's pretty close. What is it, 10 minutes, you guys? 10, 15 minutes? Just right in center.
Hard to see much, because the
Yeah,
building
the
kind of
gates are
blocks,
closed
and then there's a
after.
gate.
But you can kind of get right in, especially during the day if you want.
We have our Christmas lights and the wreath and the garland in front of the door, so. Yes. Any other questions?
Take a while to absorb it all.
Oh, of course.
Sure. Thank you for presenting it. You articulated very well. Anybody else have any questions? Elizabeth, I think we're going to come back to this on the 18th of December.
And I'm sorry, I should have put my email on here, because really, if you have some question that feels unrelated or related, send me an email. Kathy@horticultureservices.com.
Would it be on your website?
It is, Kathy with a C.
It's on your website.
My email's on it. But, well, it should be. Now that I say that. I'd have to double check that. So what was your? Kathy at Horticulture Services. With a C, I know. Most people there with a K.
Kind of a little bit of unusual property.
Yeah.
It's kind of a horseshoe-shaped property. And Emery Herbert has his house in the middle,
Yeah.
but they are two parcel IDs, and there might even be a third one in there, but.
Okay, because I remember this when we were working on the site, or on the land use plan, okay. And you just want the pencils.
The north, the north.
Just that real
Don't want it all?
rectangular.
Thank you.
Well,
Not yet.
I would love to have the space, but. A little more than what we need.
It's sort of broken up by that, the house there, it's all wetland behind that.
It'd be very awkward.
You couldn't drive around back.
And the rest of what is remaining is probably only about 3.5 acres.
Right. All wet in there.
So right now, there's, on the very northeast corner of the property, there's some real tall existing pine trees that are right before the field access. So on our concept plan, we would leave those. Nice mature pines.
But you're not gonna keep your equipment inside buildings, it's gonna come out.
Yeah, and it's primarily those trailers and trucks.
That's kind of rough in the winter though, isn't it?
Sure, but to cover all of it would be just cost prohibitive.
Very expensive.
Especially if the tilt-up building.
And we, right,
We spent all yesterday washing our vehicles, after every snow event, we wash them. try to
Yeah,
get
that's what I
all
mean,
possible.
it seems like it's.
Diesel trucks.
It depends, half of them are diesel, half are gasoline.
it can gel up.
Yeah.
Yes,
Do
we've
you
had that.
So you
use
wash,
the same trucks to plow as you do to pull your trailers?
We do. We don't plow with the trucks, but we use them to pull the skid steer trailers.
So we've had discussions in the past about how long it takes to warm up the diesels in the winter. Do you have someone there early doing that? Or?
If it's really cold, we plug them in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tank use.
so when you get these snow events, you guys could be pulling out of there at 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock?
Yep.
And do you wash them, do you plan to wash them at your site?
We plan to have a wash bay in the shop.
We have that currently.
Because it would be impossible to keep our trucks beautiful and clean if we did not.
The other is any fertilizer, right, currently that's all in, we put that indoors, we store it, fertilizer and chemicals, that's indoors.
So you guys are very familiar with all the waste management and all of the regulations of fuel and fertilizer and
We've had
indoor-
regular
indoor
visits.
washing with drains.
In Centerville, we have regular visits from the different entities who are responsible for watching that kind of thing.
Most of your snow is done by skid steers then.
And, probably, I don't know, maybe there's 2/3 of them are actually on site, they're sitting on our site, the skid steer's actually sitting there. So, there's maybe about 10 trucks that run out of it. Well, and there's more for the hangers, pickup trucks.
So I asked you a quick question here, when you're on Fenway over there, was that your skid steer that makes the snow off the roof?
Oh, I hope not.
No? Well, it's not a roof, it's like the garage.
We don't do anything on the roofs anymore. Our insurance
I thought it was
company
pretty
doesn't like that.
talented, to tell you the truth.
Oh,
Unless they hired it out.
they probably had it
Damaging
out.
the shingles.
On holiday, they just go up to this.
Okay,
What do you mean?
If someone's like a special,
He had a different bucket on it.
oh, maybe if someone's.
It amazed me, anyway. I thought he was a good
You sit there
driver.
and watch,
Huh?
right?
Well, get paid. Driving by.
Kathy, I have more of a theory question for you. So, you are currently located in Centerville, and you're looking to relocate, and I know you've visited Columbus, but, what is it about this site that appealed to you to move your business here? I understand about the community thing, but what about this site? Was it freeway visibility? Was it a county road? I mean, what made you decide that this was a good site for your business?
Access, so freeway access. So it's easy to hop on a freeway, you go north or go south and get to the freeway from Freeway Avenue. Space. I love that there's ample space on this site for two things. Being that there's about a little over 8 acres upland, that's more than what we need right now. So there's room for us to probably double our size right there. But I love that there's the wetland and these ponds. It gives us an opportunity just to have a nice place for our employees to be. Because a lot of our staff live just anywhere around. They might be in an apartment, they might be in a place where it's not very nice, you know, just the surroundings. And they'll hang out at our Centerville shop and have a cookout at the end of the day. And I wanted to have a space where they could do that. A space where they could have an employee garden if they so chose to put in a couple tomatoes. And there's plenty of space to do this on that property. And that's why it's really appealed to me. I know that sounds a little insignificant or not necessary, but it's important for me to make a place where our employees are happy. To be there.
Culture.
That's why one of you guys is still there for 25 years.
Thank you.
And well, that's another good point. There's some properties that we had kind of looked at way south. Okay, they're closer to Woodbury, so in some ways that would make more sense. But going back to the community thing, they're not in a community that we would necessarily want to be part of. It's just way south there, you know, so far away. But also, most of our long-term people are up here. They're coming from Lindstrom and from Forest Lake, from Scandia. We want to be near to where they live.
Employees must like that, hear that.
Should have to turn them going south.
Well, I,
Oh, yeah. I could driving through the traffic. And be in a community where you're not even noticed. Whereas we know from what we hear everybody say, Columbus is a really welcoming community for businesses. So we like that. There's a lot of communities that we've looked at that are not so welcoming business.
well, is that it?
Folks, I know
Well,
you guys
thank
have
you
a
very
long
much.
night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Couple weeks.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
I'm gonna leave my card. I got a couple cards for you and you guys have questions.
Very cool.
Number 7, maybe a Christmas baby.
That's a lot of kids. I have some cards here, guys. If anyone has any questions for us, for commercial real estate, Elizabeth, get a hold of me too. Thank you again for your time. Thank you so much. Thanks.
So one of the reasons why I thought this would work well is because you took a lot of notes and sometimes it's easier to, when you hear about theory and when you're trying to do that, applying it, when you freshly heard, you know what I mean, an actual concept come in, you can relate it back. I thought it would be easier to do it that way, because sometimes we don't always have applications, but this seemed to work well. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I know you had some words of wisdom.
Oh, he'll give you one.
There is a test at the end.
Lucky.
So these are, after I met with Elizabeth on Monday and she explained how hard we're going to work. I made some thoughts, I had some thoughts and wrote some of them down. What we collectively decide during the next several months of this planning and zoning process will chart the course of Columbus for the next 10 years. Our obligation to the taxpayers is to, number one, plan for businesses that will produce a strong tax base in order to offset the increasing costs of maintaining our city. Number two, plan businesses that will be an attribute to our city, user-friendly, non-polluting, and non-damaging to our roads and neighborhoods. Number three, provide design standards that will support the Columbus brand. Do we want a pre-recorder that looks Waynish? That was the, with piles of rubble, junkyards, and dump trucks? Or do we want a city that is welcoming and prosperous space to everyone who comes to and passes through Columbus on I-35? Our planner, Dean, and Elizabeth, the administrator, are both experts in planning and development. They've worked through this process twice. This will be the third time doing this for Columbus. So if we work together and listen to their advice and direction, we can set a plan for a thriving business district in Columbus. Please, please, please ask questions over and over until you really think you get what we're talking about. Because I read through Untitled this about 3 times, and there's a lot to learn, a lot to understand. But they will answer your questions, and they really, really know what they're talking about.
Got to be talking about Elizabeth.
So ask all the questions so that you understand the process. So collectively, we can make informed decisions that will not further damage our city, but position Columbus for a successful future. And as we formulate our plan, keep in mind that Columbus has a very limited amount of commercial real estate in the freeway corridor and actually in Lake Drive also. Much of the property in that area, as we just heard from those folks, 25 acres they wanted, and there's 8 acres upland. And by the time they get done, they'll have about 4.5. They just don't know it. Much of the property in that area has significant undeveloped wetland and is also subject to side yard and front yard setbacks, water retention basins, et cetera, that limit the buildable space. So what we have is very valuable, and that's why we have to think, learn, think, and make a decision. With that, back to you.
Did the council get copies of these?
I didn't give those out yet.
You want to hand them?
Sure.
So they know. I'll agree with Elizabeth that it is very convenient to help you make this connection. And I don't want to pick on anybody, but I know Jody and Pam have been through some of this in their tenure, and I took for granted when I walked in here a couple of months ago that you all knew what was going on a lot more than I did. And we were thrust into several things, apartments and biking and finishing up Bear Home. And I overlooked the fact that this basic understanding that just comes second nature to me is something that, not that you're struggling with, but would be helpful to spend a little time. And the way I would like to do it is go through this chronology of the development of 3 different comprehensive plans and the subsequent changes that we did with zoning. And we haven't done that the 3rd time. We haven't gotten to that zoning exercise, but maybe the information that I've assembled, and this all remarkably was still in my computer. You will laugh a little bit about the quality of maps from 1999 compared to today. I mean, the technology is so different. But I did my first exercise in planning back in the late 1970s, and that was all by hand. I mean, you used to take a razor blade and cut out different patterns, zipatone they called them, or you hand drew maps. You actually hired graphic artists to do maps in the old days. So I'm finishing my 5th round of planning in the Twin Cities, and again, I'm astounded that somehow I've survived 20-plus years in Columbus, began helping you back in, I think, 1996. So, as the mayor said, I really encourage the questions. You can interrupt me at any time. This isn't meant to be a PowerPoint. I simply found things that were available to help me explain to you what we did in those procedures. And quite honestly, when you open the very first page after the cover, this is a series of handouts that we used with the general public early on in the development of the comprehensive plan. I think we started this in 1996, it says, yes. So maybe I was here even before that, if we had this available. And I used this exercise a lot in the 90s and early 2000s. I don't have the summaries other than I found a written summary that talks about the actual orientation that we did, and this was one of the town meetings in September 26, 1996. And it is something that I would just ask that you go ahead and read on your own to give you an idea of that type of exercise. I think there's an interest here in the community that we use an approach perhaps like this, but not nearly as wide-reaching as we were gearing to the public to help us develop a plan. But in 2 weeks, and Elizabeth and I haven't really even talked about the specifics, do our own roundtable and let you start supplying the types of information that we got from the general public, applying that to what we're going to try to do in amending this zoning ordinance. So that's really, I thought it was remarkable that this was available from 1996. It just gives you an idea again what we did, even to 20-year headlines. We asked people, what is it you want to see in your community in 20 years? What would the headline be in the city of Columbus? And some of those, again, aren't evident in the summaries that are here, but it is extremely helpful that you be allowed that type of exercise. And again, for me, being kind of thrust into, I don't have 2 months to work with you. I have 1 week to write a staff report on this or that, and it pushed me, and it left you out in the cold, not even understanding from the past other than Pam or Jody that we're used to my series of findings and recommendations that come about. You didn't have an opportunity that they did many years ago to actually understand clearly all of the components of a zoning ordinance, let alone understand the connection between the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. So again, I don't intend to walk through the specific exercises or the outcomes of that, but as you walk through those specific conclusions, I'm coming to about page 10. It says May 11th, 1998. So we hadn't finished the comprehensive plan, but this is a memo to the town board, and it talks about residential land use options. Jody will laugh about it, Pam will laugh about it. We've done this for over 20 years. My favorite story at this time, one of the public meetings when we were talking about flexible lot sizes, density transfers, things of that nature, in a presentation, and I think the mayor was at that particular meeting. I had a gentleman come up in the audience and literally push me away from the podium and say, he's lying. He just wants to get rid of our 5-acre lot size. And there was a group in the community that did not want to change the 5-acre lot size. When we were developing this comprehensive plan, it became slogans for yard signs during the election at that time, save our 5-acre lot size. Our intention was not to promote that, but we also had a contingency that showed up at public meetings that said, why do we have to have 5 acres? It doesn't take that much to operate a septic system. And that becomes a decision that policymakers make and planning commissioners make, not outside planners like me. But even in the course of presenting that information, it was evident early on in my tenure in Columbus that this was a tough issue. It was a sore spot. We can't talk about changing our precious 5-acre standard. And that's fine. It went on the big back burner, but I thought you would get a kick out of that. And then the next page I'm coming to is actually the cover from the 1999 comprehensive plan. And what I copied out of that document first are the descriptions, again, of these different land use designations. So in a comprehensive plan, we talk about land use designation. In a zoning ordinance, we talk about zoning districts. They ultimately got to be consistent with each other. They've got to be compatible. But the land use plan is not the same as the zoning ordinance. It sets the stage for the zoning ordinance. And if we want to make changes in the land use designation, we have to amend the comprehensive plan. We just can't come and look at a map and say, well, that was a mistake. That needs to be retail, not agriculture. If it was a mistake, or if the attitude in the community changes, before you can change the zoning from agriculture to commercial or whatever, you have to change the comprehensive plan. That is the law. So the rules that we are governed by in the 7-county metropolitan area are extremely strict. It has gotten to be no fun doing long-range planning within the metropolitan area from my perspective, because it takes the community participation and a lot of community choices away and requires us to spend all our time meeting the requirements of the Metropolitan Council. So if you understand our own relationship between a land use designation and a zoning district, then let's back up. Before we start this process, the Metropolitan Council develops its own long-range land use plan. In the 1990s, it was called the Blueprint. And so all of us had seen a copy of the Metropolitan Council's Blueprint. And it was a series of maps. It created designations, names for each of the geographic areas in the Twin Cities. So we were way at the end of what was happening in terms of urban development back in the 90s. There was no urban development in this area. You had a small area, and they were called satellite cities. They were called rural centers. There were a variety of names for communities like Forest Lake that weren't attached to the rest of the urban area. So they had their own wastewater treatment facility. It had developed with urban services, but it was a compact community core. You didn't have the growth that we've seen most recently in Blaine and Hugo, filling in the gap from the Twin Cities themselves coming out to the edge. It's almost connected now. But back in the 90s, it wasn't. And during this plan, the concept of establishing an urban district in your freeway corridor was included in this plan. Because that's not a land use issue, I didn't want to burden you with trying to understand that relationship, but in this plan, the other descriptions, and this is land use map that was included in our 1999 plan, and it just has boxes drawn around the freeway corridor and a box on Lake Drive. The rest of it is basically either park or rural residential. In the balance of this plan was a description for the city to go out and connect through Forest Lake Township, which was the jurisdiction at that particular time. And we had resolutions of approval from Forest Lake Township to make a connection through Forest Lake Township to the Metropolitan Interceptor, which had become extended up to Forest Lake so they could eliminate what was a polluting private waste treatment plant. There was no capacity for that planned at that time. The Metropolitan Council kind of took this with a grain of salt, like, yeah, right, you're going to start your own little sewer and water district. Not many communities do this from scratch. And from that, we developed, and I did hand out another document here. It kind of describes in a little more detail the planning that went into the sewer districts. This was called the Town of Columbus Events Calendar. I found that this morning in my computer from the incorporation report that I had prepared when you were all going through the incorporation process in 2006. And this is an excellent summary of what had happened leading up to that incorporation, including all of the information about establishing both the sewer and the water district. So you can look at that. I would have included it in this packet, but I didn't find it till today. In any event, the significance of the 1999 plan was ultimately evaluating change in the community, but not doing it. The 5-acre standard stayed. We never used the term plan unit development or clustering again for many years. I valued my longevity at that time and wasn't going to get ousted from another public meeting. And so while we examined all of those things, the 1999 plan didn't say anything about growth alternatives such as density transfer or clustering, things of that magnitude. It simply said, we're going to stick with this 5-acre lot size. We created a justification for why you were consistent with the Metropolitan Council's standard at that time, which was a 10-acre density or 1 home per 10-acre standard for communities like Columbus. If you were in a community like many down in Dakota County with farmland, your maximum density was 1 per 40. And if you had 5-acre lot sizes, you had to do something that changed that. You weren't going to be permitted to carry those further. In our case, we wrote up information with the extensive amount of acreage owned by the state in Carlos Avery and Lamprecht Pass. For all intents and purposes, we were locked into growth, and our 1 per 5 was consistent with 1 per 10 and would be for another 10 years. We used that argument in the 2009 plan as well. The most significant thing, and we have some other graphics that we can talk about in a little more detail, but we had a freeway corridor that was in flux. It was going to go from a strictly rural corridor to an urban corridor. At that time we had, and I couldn't find a copy, I know you have them here in your library, which identified Freeway District A and Freeway District B. I think A was up near the interchange and everything else was B. And it was kind of loosey-goosey ordinance language, what was allowed. But because of many of the activities that were in place at that time which included like trout air and the aquaculture that was associated with raising fish. That was a major component of that particular zoning district. So,
That was commercial rec.
I'm sorry?
That was commercial rec. There was freeway.
Commercial rec, we had a third category.
There's a third, yeah.
And what follows this map is ordinance
I just
number.
want
Yeah.
one thing. I just want you all to notice that if you look at the top of that page, it says 10th draft. Just so you know, that it's never done in just one time. You know what I mean? It takes a while before you get through this, and there's a lot of details to it. And if you look at, it's 2003, it took us a lot of time to get through, because this is, you know, we're way now into the process, but it took time by the time we got through the land use, then we got through the zoning districts, what uses we had to put in, before we actually got this draft. So it took us 18 months to get to that point after we adopted the comprehensive plan. So it was a long road. And the EDA at the time got involved. So it wasn't just the planning commission, it was the EDA, the planning commission, and the council. We also had a committee, we created a committee, and that committee also helped do drafting of ordinances. So it was a lot of eyes on it, which is why it took so long to get it together, but it was a complete overhaul. There were things that were the same, but there was a lot of detail put in. So I guess what I'm saying is it takes a lot of thought about what you want to do, and we can all get there. You know what I mean? As far as if you truly want to spend the time to look at it, because it will take time for you to learn about all the different things components that go into it, and then figure out what uses and then the performance standards afterwards. Did a very tiny portion of it with the apartments. In this case, you'd have to do it 5 times over. You know what I mean, for each district. So, and the horse racing came much later. So that zoning district didn't come in until 2003. No, wait a minute, 4. I think that was in 4.
I think they approached us in 4 and
Yeah.
late 5 in the zoning and map changes, things happened. 6, and they started construction at 8.
So that did take a comprehensive plan amendment because we didn't have horse racing. So that's the other thing is, you know, as much as we finish everything, the first big application comes in, doesn't fit. And then we had to amend our comprehensive plan. That was we had like 5 different applications in that application.
So as Elizabeth said, ordinance number 03 started in 01,
Yeah.
the year after our comp plan was done. And as you can see on this very first page, we had a new definition of a dwelling unit. We had nothing about attached homes. And so we distinguished between detached, which all of you presumably live in, and described for the first time attached homes, duplexes, or townhomes, things of that nature, because we were contemplating standards to be created for urban attached units, which at that time were limited to 3 units per acre. And you're now finding people that come into your community and argue why they can't afford to build it less than 30 units per acre. So our standards at that time, again, were what a lot of communities on the outer edge of the region were dealing with. There wasn't a market for 6 and 8 units per acre type building. We had no public transportation. And so what gets built? Mainly a lot of duplexes and some 4-unit townhomes, things of that nature. And so the development of this ordinance established the suburban residential zoning district. So this was our urban zoning. So this was where the townhomes would go. The comprehensive plan got amended later to show where it was likely that these may go, and that was the northwest part of the freeway corridor and the very southeast. We said, let's keep it away from the interchange, but not take up good commercial land. We never had a map that showed suburban residential zoning. We never zoned a site. The comp plan, and that'll show up on the next comp plan map, shows the suburban residential overlay. That's a land use designation. That was the only place where we could zone property suburban residential. But way back in the 10th draft of Ordinance 03, it used to be Ordinance 02, they got carried over into 03. We established, again, all of the standards for the suburban residential district, and we've never used it.
It was only senior housing.
We'll get to that. As you thumb through this zoning ordinance, we also created for the first time the community retail district. That went on the map. The description in the comprehensive plan talked about an area that was close to the interchange itself that would be the highest intensity retail uses, where the entertainment, the restaurants, things of that nature would go. You can see the laundry list of things that included hotels, motels, art galleries, and on and on and on. Keep going a little bit further. We had some design standards way back in 2003 that established what was primarily face brick. That's been on the books for since 2003 for the community retail district. We had a second level that we were talking about, and that was big box uses, which were booming 20 years ago. And this was called the commercial/showroom district, which is kind of the meat or the middle of your freeway corridor.
Which, by the
And,
way, we made up.
pardon?
The group just made it up. They called it commercial showroom. So there's no magic as to what these districts are called. We just made it up at the time.
Yours have been traditionally descriptive. Commercial showroom, community retail. You kind of get what it means. Light industry, commercial industrial. Ooh, that must be the everything goes district or whatever. Some communities got B1, B2, B3. You got to open the book every time and go, what's the name? What is it? What's allowed there? It doesn't matter what you call it. I don't care if you pick Mickey Mouse District. It doesn't matter. The significance is, does it fit the comprehensive plan? What does your map say? We just adopted this map. What commercial uses or what industrial uses can go in these areas that are non-residential? That's the key. So again, you can thumb through this. We also established light industrial district, and then we realized that we had no dimensional standards. So this is one of your performance standards, basic. What's the acreage limitation? We created this for all of the uses in the district, updated it to fit now our new corridors. So you see the agriculture standards. We don't have any ag property zoning anymore. We don't have any agricultural preserve. We don't have any suburban residential. You had rural residential. We zoned the community retail, the commercial showroom, and the light industry for the first time, and we called Lake Drive commercial/industrial, as had been there for some time. So these performance standards now deal with what I usually refer to as dimensional standards to separate them from either environmental standards or design standards. Every community's got to have these. And as Elizabeth said, I mean, this took a long time to develop. Why is it 30 feet front yard setback? Why can't it be 10? Well, you want to clutter your roads up. Traditionally, that's the largest setback, unless in some communities where you have dissimilar districts, commercial abutting residential, you might end up having a backyard when you have a different district that you want even larger than the front yard. And you walk through all of those, you come up with a rationale, but you cannot go into the library or go on the internet today and pick out a single book that says, here's what the setback ought to be. When we had all of this effort done, here's what Lakeville, here's whatever the communities are, they're all over the map. You're a rural community, we have standards that reflect those properties that aren't urbanizing. We tend to have lesser setback standards where the property's gonna cost more because you've got urban uses. But in Minnesota, we got snow, we got a lot of it, now you gotta have a place for it. And so whether it's a side yard or a front yard, if you're gonna let the parking lot occupy part of your front yard, where's the rest of the snow storage go when it doesn't block intersections and driving view? That's the basis of them. I would say these are unique to your community based upon input that goes almost 20 years back.
We had one other district that most people don't know about. So in Coon Lake, you know, that's our only area where we have very small lots. Most of those lots are 50 feet wide. And there used to be just cabins on it, but now people will buy them and they will put all year round homes. They'll go right to the, you know, within 5 feet. Right now, the side yard setback is 10 feet. Well, if you have a 50-foot lot and you try to take 20 feet and then you smash a 30-foot house in there, it's not gonna work. So all of them were coming in for variances. And we today still have a variance, so we still have a 10-foot side yard setback. But we have what they call a Coon Lake overlay. So when you look in the code and you see CLO, it means Coon Lake overlay. And it was because, what do you do with these 50-foot lots? I'm not kidding, you've got septic systems, wells, people trying to make sure you're separate, you've got drainage issues, you've got water coming off roof, you need to do water quality, you can't put runoff into the lake, and so we were starting to have some major issues. People, didn't want to put gutters on the house, they didn't want to put, ponds on the property, and they were these long, narrow lots, so they were 50 by 300. And so we created this overlay district for Coon Lake, and there are very specific requirements. You have to have drainage plans, you have to, and it was because they were coming in and people were building these big houses, and then they were saying, well, we can't even see the lake anymore. You got this big mansion next door, and now we can't see anything. And so we really had to work and think about, okay, so what are we gonna do there? Because accessory buildings really can't go behind the house, because in Coon Lake, behind the house is between the lake and the house. And there are different setbacks for shoreland. And people didn't want to look at people's accessory buildings. So we really had to look long and hard to find out where should those be. So if you ever take an opportunity to drive in Coon Lake, you will find that the accessory buildings are between the road and the house. They're not between the lake and the house. You'll find that houses don't block each other's views. You know what I mean? They try to be very linear when they're doing their setback from the lake. We have to be very careful about the septic and well where they place those. So that is a kind of a unique area. And if you look, there's very specific requirements there. And I think that's what we added there too.
Non-conforming lots is what every time we dabble into it.
Yeah.
When you're issuing variances constantly, you need to take a look at your standards. And what Elizabeth just described is unique to Coon Lake. It really wasn't a problem on any of the other lakes. These were summer homes, and the lots were developed or subdivided much earlier than other properties in the community. And so you either render these properties legally non-conforming or just outright non-conforming, and it's difficult for people to get mortgages. And she's writing letters constantly, and so we established unique to Coon Lake standards that were specific for only that area. I wasn't going to go into this, but it's a good opportunity. I'm jumping ahead, so we're going to come back. But in 2006, we had gone through land use changes and zoning regarding the racetrack, but we also incorporated at that time. One of the requirements for incorporation, now that we're no longer a township, kind of slouching off of free services from the county, they said, you're going to do your own prosecution from now on, unless you want to pay us to do that, which we elected to do. But you're going to take over shoreland management and floodplain management. So the very first thing we did within 6 months of incorporation was take over shoreland and floodplain management, meaning we had to adopt a shoreline management ordinance that would be approved by the DNR and a floodplain ordinance that would be approved by the feds through the DNR. And it created all kinds of problems where some of our standards were less than their standards. In other words, it was creating a new layer of nonconformity like Coon Lake did. And we literally created exceptions for us by arguing that we dramatically exceeded far more standards that were in the shoreline and floodplain provisions than those exceptions that we were asking for. By golly, they finally accepted that. A lot of communities don't get away with it, but it was in part based upon we have so much shoreline, we have so much floodplain, we created arguments that set the stage for things. Those are also overlay ordinances. I didn't see any hands go up and ask me what is an overlay, so I'm going to tell you.
I thought it was a stupid question, so.
When you hear that term overlay, and we have three of them, Coon Lake, shoreline, and now floodplain, overlay ordinances. They are standards that don't create a separate district, even though we illustrate the Coon Lake area because of its uniqueness. I think it was described legally even. I can't remember. I think we had all the legal descriptions. So the use of an overlay, and I'll throw in a fourth one, planned unit development.
Oh,
Okay?
at the time though, we didn't.
That was
talk
still a
about that.
naughty word back in the 2000s. So we use the planned unit development as an overlay. So what that means, when we were talking at our last meeting about this layering effect of comp plans on the bottom, then you got a zoning map, then you've got zoning district uses, then you've got all of these performance standards. An overlay is part of that relationship. It's not a zoning district. It is a set of standards that apply to a specific area as an overlay to those. And in the description of those different, the three primary overlay districts that we reference, Coon Lake, Shoreland, and it'll say right in the beginning, unless otherwise said, these standards trump the zoning ordinance. So we have, my zoning book might look different from yours because I got rid of the rest of the city code and just put the zoning in one book along with shoreland, floodplain, stormwater, wetlands, and signs, the things that I get stuck with. And this document then is the structure for everything that we do on a day-to-day business, sit of a land use map. So this is our Bible once the comp plan is done. But lingering above that is the special districts, which we call overlay. We don't want to zone. I'll give you an example. For rivers, the shoreland jurisdiction applies 1,000 feet. 300 feet from a river and 1,000 feet from a designated water body, a lake. And it could be just a wetland. So those standards apply within that 1,000 feet. Well, what happens if we create a zoning district on that? It's the shape of a circle or a line going through your community, and it bisects every parcel that's out there. And we'll get to that change that we did on Lake Drive for a very similar reason. All of a sudden, property owners could be seen if you created a zoning district representing this overlay. It would bisect their property. So the county or your tax person comes in and says, that's rural residential, but this is Coon Lake overlay, or this is floodplain, or this is whatever. And you start bisecting parcels, they want a legal description of it. And it's like, time out, we're not going there. We're going to illustrate these on a map. And so if you look at the zoning map, it'll show you where all the shoreline boundaries are, the 300 feet or the 1,000 feet on all of the lakes. But it's not a zoning area, it's an overlay area. And it establishes additional standards above the zoning ordinance. Some more restrictive, sometimes less restrictive. And that's, again, when we created the shoreline floodplain standards, we argued with the state that we were 90% over compliant. Our lot sizes were generally far in excess of what the state was requiring for shoreline property. Some exceptions existed, and we simply said, our zoning ordinance is going to apply. We're not going to back off those standards, but we need some exceptions in these areas. And I don't want to burden you with those details, but it was not a given. We went back and forth with both the feds and the state on the shoreline and floodplain overlay ordinance, and they, basically were saying, why do you think you're special? And we made a case and we said, we're different. And we are far more compliant than pick any of your neighbors, We had so many non-sewered parcels in Forest Lake, once Forest Lake Township and City were joined. They had exceptions all over the map. They weren't meeting the majority of standards. But your community, having been 5 acres since the 1950s, was more compliant than most communities, and they finally bought that. So that's another layer on our set of jurisdictions that we have to deal with in planning and zoning. The very bottom, the starting point is the comp plan. So when somebody comes in, and part of your exercise for the next meeting will be, look at the comp plan, what does it say? What is the description for the property that these folks were looking at?
Which is the Larry Leiden property, which is the ones that Horticulture Services wants to be on.
So you look at that property, what does it show up on the land use map? That's the starting point. And then at the back of my document, or if you find the one that Ben handed out the last meeting, read the descriptions of the property that's located in. That's your starting point. Read the description for that land use designation. Hint, it's commercial in the comp plan, okay? So read
Because it's red.
Red.
Yeah, the red one. Don't
Yeah.
read commercial/industrial, don't read industrial,
That's the
read
pink
commercial.
one, right.
And then, our current zoning map says that that's zoned commercial showroom.
Right.
And then you read the uses in the zoning text under commercial showroom. Read the permitted uses, read the conditional uses, and see where they fit. And if you find that something might not fit, go read another one, like light industry or commercial/industry in the zoning ordinance. And maybe there's a fit, but it might not be on this property. So that's the sequence that you go at. There is an overlay here, perhaps. You've got a river behind these properties, you've got floodplain in these properties, but that won't have any consequence in determining what the use is. Those overlays are more performance standards than they are use-oriented. So in the zoning ordinance, you have permitted uses, conditional uses, interim uses. In the comp plan, you have a land use designation, which is the hierarchy that describes what do we intend to do in the red area or the purple area or the yellow area. What is that?
Okay, so right now, I mean, this would be the new comp plan, showing all is commercial. But then you go back here, the only thing that we've really changed is adding the high density areas in certain spots. Otherwise, the showroom area and all that are still the same, correct?
No,
No,
Or have they changed?
so what's happening now is, so we have a land use map, and the designations in the land use map for the commercial, which is the red and the purple, those lines changed. And when those lines change, that means that your zoning districts and your land use plan are incompatible. So you are required to make those changes. And so that's part of the changes that we have to make, because the purple area was moved down to 145th, and that was not in the previous comp plan. So as far as land use goes, the new land use plan is different than the previous one.
so we do have the mixed density, that will be an issue. And as Elizabeth just described, we've got less light industry on the east side of Hornsby.
Yeah.
That's a change. Right now, the basic descriptions start with the comp plan. What do they say about either the red or the purple? And then when you find where you're located, and this particular proposal isn't an area of change. So you can read the current zoning descriptions for both commercial showroom, and I'd say read.
And that's this paper. These are the current descriptions for the zoning districts, which is different than the land use plan descriptions for the land use.
Yeah,
don't-
sorry, I did not
Dean-
renumber these.
Dean doesn't have page numbers on it, but, so, I think what's key is, and maybe you highlight for now, zoning district versus land use, because those descriptions are different.
I don't even know where you are.
It's
So this is the one you're
midpoint,
showing in
it's
2004.
midpoint in
Yep,
your
and that's
document,
what
it's
we
after
said.
it's after the zoning
And I was kind
text.
of looking at Town of Columbus, I know we're a city, I just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure
and it
that
is
this
changed.
still-
This is just,
Okay.
in another set of work papers, I have the updated one, but it's the same thing, it's just, we changed town
Yeah.
to city.
So you're saying where it says zoning districts, it really is land?
Nope,
Oh,
this
it
is, nope, these are zoning districts. Land use is in the front, which has to do with the comp plan. So the comp plan is way in the front, and I forget where you have that, Dean.
Which one? The original descriptions, right after, yeah.
So in this case, in my work papers, because that's what Ben gave out, like, these are the ones from 1999, but we have the new versions for you. So that would be, in land use, they're described in the comp plan. For zoning districts, they're described in the zoning code.
Can you use the example with the Viking? Because you told us that we made a mistake there.
No, in performance standards, not in
That
zoning.
was not a use issue. There were questions. I mean, it was debatable based upon what they presented. Is it retail or is it more distribution?
Well, it is distribution, but then why did you recommend that it should be approved? That's what I don't know.
I had this landed on my desk 3 days before your deadline and understood that discussion had taken place and it was considered retail. That was the basis for my proposal.
Because they weren't distribution. That's not what they did.
Yeah,
They are
they're both.
They're both.
And
Yeah.
so from my perspective, in my findings, I found that they were retail. So that was not an issue, and that was handed to me, that finding has been made. It is retail. It may also be distribution, it may be whatever. The things in that memo that I commented on that we really needed to talk about regarded the access issues and the design standards. That property was not commercial showroom, that was community retail.
Right.
So being the description of primarily brick, it's a stretch when you got tip-up panels and some brick on it, how we get there. Well, it was the first project submitted as a PUD, where you have some liberty to make findings and say that this is a trade-off that we're willing to make. If you go back and read my recommendations, that's what I'm saying. You gotta make this finding that that's acceptable, because that's a stretch. There was no landscaping on the west side, and that abutted your new mixed-use district. I called that out. Those are the things that we wanna pay attention to in findings and recommendations. That's kind of my job, but it's also yours. And people like Jody keep me on my toes all the time and find mistakes that I make, so I'm not perfect, but we go by the ordinance, not the comp plan. If it's a application that we're reviewing and we're entertaining, it's gone beyond the land use plan. It's now zoning ordinance compatibility.
But to me, it didn't seem like it was retail because I was familiar with those distribution centers. So what can the planning commission do at that stage when you've already said we should approve it? That's what I didn't understand.
You can always question it. Again, based upon my timing, walking in the door and having the set of plans handed to me the second day we were trying to figure out the other stuff going on. Oh, by the way, see if it's complete. And it was during that completion analysis that I was informed that it is retail. That business has changed. It was what I would call predominantly retail many years ago, and it has been changing like everything else. But to say it isn't retail was not correct. They still did retail. Was it predominantly retail? Our ordinance doesn't describe it in that method. If it's retail, it's okay. That may be one of the changes you want to make. What degrees of,
Percentage, which percentage of their business?
you know, you can get into that. For me, in the deadlines we were approaching, it was more the issue, this is, because the other thing that I was handed was, by the way, we got an apartment project, we don't have any standards. We don't have anything. And so it was pretty blatant to me that that project did not come close to meeting the standards that were in our community retail district. That was the zoning at that time, and those were the only standards that we had. In the course of debate and discussion, eventually I would have said, well, gee, I have another 13-page ordinance that I've drafted that has revised standards. And you may recall me saying, we need to revisit your community retail, because if you're not going to be approving things anymore that are primarily brick, we should change. We don't want to go through a planned unit development process just like variances where everything is an exception. There's something wrong. So we got to come up with standards that are realistic for the proposals you're getting, or you're going to hold to your guns and we're going to turn them down because they don't come close, and you're not going to give variances and you're not going to give PUDs. Those are the options.
Now, what about this right in, right out? To me, that seems extremely dangerous, and they shouldn't have been approved for that very reason.
That was the other thing I commented on, and we have met with the neighbors to the west. We're trying to do what we can. We'd rather divert monies that they may spend on a haphazard, unsafe access location where it's not primarily automobiles coming in and out. It's bigger.
Why isn't that resolved before it goes to the planning?
Because Anoka County already approved that.
Because Anoka County already approved.
That's their road, that's their jurisdiction. They come in here and they say, here's,
That brings up a question. If they approved it and they have the jurisdiction, still denying on that? Or because they have the jurisdiction and they've approved it, do we have to say, accept it? And it comes down to with the jurisdiction, whoever has that, can we override it?
Do you remember how you felt, Pam, about that? I mean, you questioned too afterwards. I'm sorry. Remember when he said that we had made mistakes about the,
After the meeting, yeah.
when it was, I mean, I
Well,
was
it became
going
very
by.
apparent at the end that this traffic is not that roundabout,
Yeah.
and that property, and those are things that we didn't even have come up about until after the meeting, and then became really grave concerns about the project. And then also, I felt like there was back information on that that we didn't know about.
And the fact that it was, we were told that we should approve it when we had these questions. That
Or
was
we didn't have
confusing.
all the information. I thought we didn't have all the information.
I think
The
that's,
question is, if you, the staff, and the planner, say, recommend that it should be approved, that doesn't mean we have to go by what you say.
But we
know,
have to have a
because-
reason.
Well, of course we do. I mean, we can't just say no. And that's where it comes back. If you have the jurisdiction of an outside local county, can we say no for that alone reason?
So, you know, from a staff perspective, we look at the zoning code and we give you a planning report based on what's in the code. You know, when it comes to the planning commission and council, that's where you kind of get into policy issues and you look at things and you're like, well, you know, we should change that in the future, or that's not too good. But for us, we don't have a lot of latitude. We can point things out, you know, to you and say, well, this doesn't quite look right, or you maybe look into this. But we're gonna tell you what's in the code. And one of the things that I did point out in the code at the time was, in our code, when they came in, it says retail, I mean, in the permitted uses, there's retail, office, I mean, there's a laundry list of different things. And when it came in, there was a retail component, an office component, and yes, there was you know, where they stored their things, because they're rather large, the things that the safety equipment is large. So I did bring it up, I said, you know, our code is silent on this. You know, we don't have a percentage. It doesn't say that it has to be over 25%, or it doesn't say percentage. I said, you know, rule of thumb, you might want to say 51% of the permitted uses, but again, it's a little stretch because it doesn't say that. And so when we talked about it as a staff, we said, okay, they have a component of office, they have a component of retail. Those are permitted uses. And so at that point, the code didn't say, well, it had to be 51%, 75%, 80%. And I said, well, if that's really the direction we want to go, then it really should be something that you changed in the description of that community retail zoning district. It should say, you know, in these areas, we want an 80% of the building or 75% of the building dedicated to retail or office or whatever, you know what I mean, whatever it is. Because then when applicants come in, we can say, well, unless, you know what I mean, you don't make it, or you build a building accommodating that percentage.
And how do we do that? How do we get these percentages in there?
And I think Dean would have to describe the district and come up with language that describes that.
It would be a standard.
how could you enforce something like
Because it
that?
doesn't.
No, but I mean, I
But
come
you
in and
might
say,
wanna
I'm looking for
stipulate
75%, and I don't need the 75%.
But you gotta.
It's not common, it's not a typical ordinance standard, and there are communities that have so many districts and attempt to create definitions for every use, so it will say, instead of primarily a majority, you know, things of that nature. What does primarily mean? What is a majority? Well, it's at least 51%.
Right.
So, while that's not common, if it's anticipated that this becomes a bigger problem, it's something you may consider in establishing the language. It's a slippery slope whether you do or don't do it. I think had this property been classified as commercial showroom, you would have found a lot more receptivity. Commercial showroom allows warehousing. It allows retail like lumberyards. But it is a mix or a combination, and nobody details what the individual percentages of each component of that may be. But as a straight community retail, you're taking the information from an applicant in one part, you're receiving a legal opinion for another part. Those were the guiding factors in my assessment that, okay, it's retail, it's allowed. And I go into the next thing and I start looking at performance standards. So the comp plan wasn't really relevant. We look at the zoning standard in this case, and it is retail. So now you look at the performance standards. To answer your question,
hang on just a
oh,
minute.
go ahead.
So let's take out the, you know what I mean, about the rules. Read what it says under community retail. It says, the purpose of the community retail district is to encourage high-intensity retail sales and entertainment uses that serve highway users and sub-regional population bases. The high visibility and accessibility of the district will support the high standards of the design for the buildings and landscaped areas. The community retail district is not intended to serve extensive land uses or uses with predominant outside displays or storage needs. That's all it says. So when you have a business that comes in and says, I sell safety equipment, and I sell it to subcontractors that are on the freeway, they drive by, then they pick up their wares, and then they go on the freeway because that's what I'm looking for, access to and from. You start reading it and you're like, oh, to serve highway users, to the sub-regional population, and that's what they're describing to you. It kind of fits. So I guess my message back to you is, when they're reading the code back to you, when you're sitting around to the table and say, well, this sounds like me, this is where I fit, it's hard to say, well, I don't think you do.
If it's hard for you, it's really hard for us.
Well, exactly. So that's why I say it's important to describe your districts with your intent. Yes, Shelley?
Okay, the deal is this, okay, I went out and I looked at what retail was out on the internet. Okay, things are changing so fast in the world with the internet and everything, you can't necessarily, like you said, you didn't understand our need for mixed use on Lake Drive, and we come up with man caves. Who thought of man caves a year ago? Nobody. Okay, so the thing with this retail thing is, I went out and I said, well, what is retail? And almost every single site that I went to, and it said retail, it said 70% of the building is used for showroom, period. Now, our lawyer tells us that it's the end user, that if you sell to the end user, then that is retail, okay? But those were two things that the internet told me about what the general population thinks of it. So, if you have to put language in it that says prevailing understanding of what retail means, because it's changing. I talked to Viking and I said, you're not really doing retail. I said, how much of your business is online? And how much is it going to online every year? And he's going, well, 10% more, 10% more, 10% more. And then you got an online place. That's not what we think of when we think of, I don't think, retail. So the thing is that losing that component of how much was showroom versus storage was completely left out of it. I'm not saying you have to say that in the 70%, but you do have to say something about the prevailing understanding of what retail is. If we had some wording like that, then there'd be some flexibility. Otherwise, we don't have crystal balls. We have no idea that all of a sudden Hy-Vee is not doing grocery stores like they used to. Now we've got these hybrid things. Maybe they work, maybe they won't. Maybe in 10 years they'll go, whoops, that was a bad mistake. We don't know. So it's got to have some kind of wording that gives you an out, whether it's the prevailing understanding of what retail is and that sort of thing, and then you can present your case. Because
end users.
They're end users.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, the
whoever buying it,
contractor
they're still end users.
is selling it then to their client. The end
Or
user
they're
is the
using.
client. That's what's confusing.
No, but some contractors go out to the sites.
Yeah,
I mean,
they
there's-
wear the safety vest, they,
Yeah,
Well, that part of it, but he's talking about the nuts and bolts. They're not using those, they're not collecting them in their vehicle and saving them. They're using them for their project. They charge their client for those items. So they aren't the end user.
but that's not, let me back up, maybe I can help you.
You can't control that.
So, would you argue that a lumberyard is a retail use?
Some of them are,
Okay.
some of them are not.
So, I just built a home and I didn't buy anything in a traditional retail sense. I bought it because all of the distributors for windows, doors, whatever, don't have corner sales rooms anymore.
Right.
They all go through the distributors.
Right.
I'm not able to buy that directly unless I go to Menards. I can't go to, a typical other type because they only want to deal with contractors. They don't want us.
But there's different prices for the contractors that they're dealing with according to the size of the contract. So that is right there. Makes it non-retail. It makes it
But
a
it's,
distribution.
all of those items are sitting in my home right now. And
But if you go to Menards, the contractor may get a special price, but he's gonna charge you what Menards charges.
yeah, but that's getting off track. I want to use caution about the choice of words. I like what you just said, Shelley, about everything's changing, and so maybe we come up with a term like prevailing. Our legs get cut off by the person that's trying to keep you out of court, whether you like their opinion or not. They have to be the ones that advise you on what that language is. So as creative as you might get or I might get, I can tell you, once we all agree, we like that. The attorney's gonna redline it, they're gonna change it, because they're the ones that keep you out of court. So we gotta be careful, but I like what you said. This is all changing. I'm a believer, when you see the sales now that are in the newspaper and on the radio or on the Channel 11 News or whatever about how well Walmart and Target and Best Buy are doing, we may have turned the corner. Maybe people have given up on a certain level of online sales. And we don't know what that outcome is. I don't want to give up on everything that we have in our ordinance, but I think we have to modify it to reflect what appears to be changing. We need to come up with one or two new districts that occupy all of this 3 square miles in our freeway corridor, because one size doesn't fit all anymore. Our commercial showroom was good. It would have allowed Sam's Club or Costco. It would allow the lumberyards. Those big box places don't appear to be popping up anymore. They appear to be shrinking. Even the concept of grocery stores. Cup Foods, they're trying to sell out. Hy-Vee isn't building as many as quickly of these large ones, but they still work in certain markets. They don't work in ours. And so to hold out in our ordinance for a full-scale grocery store probably isn't going to happen. And when you already got Targets and Fleet Farm and Walmart right on your doorstep, you're not building enough new houses to create a market for yourself. That's part of the exercise we're going to go through eventually to change these uses. What is your market? And I guarantee you that the minute you've reached a conclusion, somebody else will come along with a whole new concept that you can change this ordinance easily. You can't change the comprehensive plan easily, but it can be done. And somebody comes in here and really wants something, they pay for it. It isn't like it's costing you a lot, but it's going to take you 6 months to amend the comp plan. We routinely can alter the zoning district if it's consistent with the comp plan, or we can change the language in the text from primarily to a majority of brick, or whatever. We can change that within the same time frame that you are reviewing and approving a project. So somebody walks in here that you want, don't worry that they're not in your ordinance. It's quick, down and dirty, easy to change. But if it's somebody you don't want, keep in mind a couple of other things. Amending a comprehensive plan is a supermajority. That's 4 votes. So I know it's still on the minds of many people. We have a bituminous plant which required a change that ended up being a supermajority. That was a conscious decision by those that had the authority to make that decision. When you change zoning standards, when you change basic uses within a zoning district, it's a simple majority. It's going to be 3 votes. So keep in mind, something extraordinary that you don't want requires probably a supermajority. Anytime you take residential property and convert it to commercial or industrial, it's a supermajority. So there are some things built into our rules and procedures that don't make it as easy as some other things. It didn't stop the racetrack, which was terribly controversial. It didn't stop the I know what's required when we look at things that you go through that might require big changes. It's part of the deal. It is a decision that's made by elected officials. It's not up to me. I just can tell you what to expect when you're making changes in your comp plan. You ought to figure at least 6 months. But your ordinance, you have a lot quicker time frame. It is not necessarily essential that you leave out the things that might come along that you want. That's the easy thing for all of us to change. And your applicant's going to be willing to do it. But you want to pay attention to the things that you might not want, things that you might view as undesirable for the community, and remove them from any of these zoning districts.
So in light of that, thinking back now to the concept that was just brought to you, let's look at the commercial showroom. So, and again, now we're looking at the zoning district. And think about this when you know what I mean, and make notes if you have to. So the commercial showroom is where they want to be. So the first thing you're going to think about is you're going to look at the comprehensive plan to make sure you think that the land use designation is correct. But then you're going to also look at the zoning district, and that's what we're going to look at now is the commercial showroom. Because here it says, the purpose of the commercial showroom district is to allow the more extensive retail uses, which include outdoor displays of retail goods for direct sale. The district is intended to provide a quality environmental mix, business uses and services, including professional offices, combined office showrooms, indoor service and repair businesses, and to encourage business that benefit from the high visibility and higher standards of building and site design. So my policy question to all of you is, when you look at horticultural services, I think that horticultural services is what they're, yeah. What do you think their business is? What do you class, what do you think that their business is? And that, you know what I mean? And if you believe that it's a service, do you think that it fits in this district, or do you really think it's a contractor shop?
Contractor.
I will tell you, they're thinking that they're a service. Because if you heard her description, she considers herself a service business. And so that's where you come in and you because that's the purposely why I had her describe why she wanted to be here, what it was, because she, truly, if you listen to her, she said, I'm a service business, and I make sure that I provide service, and I want clean vans, and that's what I do. She does not think that she's a contractor shop like North Pine Aggregate. She does not equate herself with that.
She is a contractor that
Prides
provides,
her, but she prides herself on service.
So,
and they
So
provide.
really, the definition in here is what are you considering service?
Well-
She provides a service, but she's a contractor. She is a contractor.
and the service she provides, though, is, you know what I mean, she takes care, she takes care of, you know what I mean, landscaping, snow removal, but she doesn't do it at that building. At
Right.
that building, you know what she is?
A contractor.
No, office. At that building, she said, I am going to, that's where my office is. And yes, I will have a shop, but 12 employees come to my building every day and work. And employees report here, they take a van and go elsewhere. So that, and so sometimes it really is, you have to kind of think about what really is the use of it. And I will tell you,
Storage and office space.
so,
Where's the legalities on this? I mean,
well, this is where I come, it's like, you don't have a percentage. And so I struggle with this one, I'm like, because I sat there and I'm like, well, I'm not really sure where you fit in this district, and I'm, but they're like, well, I look like everyone else. My trucks are gonna be parked outside, and next door, there's RVs parked outside, and I look, like, you know what I mean? And so I look like everyone else there, and I'm gonna tell you that mine is gonna look the best. You know why? I did berms, I did this, I did that, you know what I mean? So mine's gonna look, and by the way, I'm gonna do tip-up panels, and I'm gonna meet all your performance standards. Well,
the wording is there.
So you can kind of see where, from my perspective, is half the time they're reading this stuff to me, especially brokers. They know, they know how to read the code because they're trying to sell land. That's their business.
Well, he just tried to sell it to us.
Well, because that's what he does, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
you can't blame him there.
No,
So,
not at all.
so these definitions are used, or this guidance is used all the time. So when we start reading this, and I've taught Ben this too, every time someone comes in, I said, read the code, go back to the code. Because if you think you've memorized the whole code, you haven't memorized the whole code. And really read it and say, well, how does this apply? Does it apply? Does it fall into this category? And then if you say yes to all those questions, how are you going to sit there and say no? Based on what? This is what you said you wanted.
Right.
And if they need one
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
because like here it says including professional office.
She does.
But that's only one component of that. Does that justify it being
Well, where does it say you only have to meet one?
where does it say that you can just be one, right? You know what I mean? It's two-sided.
And believe me, they tell me at the table.
Yeah, I know.
So,
And the indoor service and repair.
exactly, that's what they do.
But the conundrum I see here, all of a sudden you start to put in other things and then it becomes prescriptive. And then, you know what I mean? So, if you take away or add, that's great, but it's like, she just said, if they need one, how do you say no? What do we, I have no idea what to do there. I mean, how would you want to limit it? How would you, we don't have to give them a permit.
Well, no, but I think you have to have really good, you have to have reasons. In other words, you can say, I know you've read this, but in my mind,
You're a contractor.
you're a
Yeah.
contractor, and this is why you're a contractor. And then you would have to list, you have 100 trucks a day going up and down, or I don't know,
Yeah,
whatever it is. Then you have to look at the detail and say, you know what, you're in this bucket for this reason, because when I read light industrial, you are so much more like that, and these are the reasons why. So I think logically, you have to come down to, does the land use, does it meet the land use? And if you, and just a couple of words, you don't have to write a paragraph, but when you're reviewing them, if you just do a couple of words and say the reasons why you think it is, or the reasons why you don't think it is. And as Bill said, if you come up with a rational reason as to why you are going down a road, there's, you know, in zoning, sometimes there's no wrong answer. There's just how, you know, who can argue better,
perception,
you know? But from what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a vision and guidance of what you want to see in the community. So we're kind of like on a clean slate where you can make tweaks and you can look at it, which is why I wanted to incorporate a example, because I think it makes you think differently when you're trying to apply it when you're reading these things.
So let's talk about this layering again. You read your description in the comp plan. What's on this old map, July 2004, still.
I'm pretty sure that's the
Yeah,
current
we
one.
updated that drawing, but I have the same one. I mean, I like this. These are the purpose statements in the zoning ordinance. So you got a broad brush description in the comp plan. This is the very first section within each individual zoning district. What's the purpose of this? So you read this purpose statement, and then you go to your permitted uses. When you go down the list of professional or permitted uses, it starts talking about a variety of things. Indoor this, indoor that. There's nothing that talks about any outside activity whatsoever. When you go to the conditional uses, then you start talking about garden centers, exterior storage as accessory to permitted uses. Accessory means a subordinate use. Their primary use is outdoor storage. Well, we can't afford a building big enough for that. Well, then you need to be in a district where the primary use includes. I don't mean to spill the beans or tell you what to do, but as you go down this list, read the general description in the comp plan, read the purpose statement, this what's on that map. By the way, that language is still the same in your current ordinance almost 20 years later. But then you get into the specific uses, and part of the argument that you build with somebody that says, well, you are a contractor shop, you might be a very nice one, but you provide a service, and gee, we allow that in our commercial industrial district, we allow that in our light industrial, but we have no reference to that in our commercial showroom or our community retail or our rural residential. That's how you make a distinction when your language isn't so specific. Our language isn't lacking specificity, except when you come to a degree of, you know, what is the professional office? Does it have to be 100% office, or can it have a mix? Our mixed use now needs to focus on what are those? You may have office retail mix, you have office residential mix, you have retail residential mix. We have to reflect those because we didn't allow it before. That'll be a whole new element, but just in focusing on, again, relationships is what I intended to do with the graphics that you had. The 3 pages prior to that sheet, by the way, were not the first effort. They were about a year into this process. And Elizabeth has another drawing, interestingly, from another consultant near this time. But these identified the very same notions that we were working on even before the comprehensive plan was done. And yet these were options within the freeway corridor, options 1, 2, and 3, and then the drawing that we were just reading that has these purpose statements, those became the ultimate boundaries. And after this meeting, you can go back and look at those 3 maps, which tend to show alternatives on where we might find these different uses that end up being the description that we came up with. Community retail, the showroom, and light industry. There were three. This is dated 2004. The next page in my handout is a colored map, which voila, 2006, we've added, it bisected the community retail district where the racetrack. So that started in 2004, the date of this earlier map that showed what our existing districts were, and we had a 2-year process when it was determined that we're going to change the zoning and include the horse racing district. Let me just quickly highlight some things and let you end with some question and answer, because I just want to walk through the rest of these. And I'm starting after that color zoning map. And that one went, again, look at the date, 2006. So the next page is a workshop. This is another comp plan update process. So keep in mind, this is every 10 years. We had a 99 plan, a 2009 plan, now I got 2019 plan. So a couple of years leading up to this, and I just happen to find this background information here. I don't remember the specific workshop, if it was limited to the Planning Commission and the Council at that time, but it identified a variety of things that we intended to do as a part of this update process. And then it went into, well, what are some of these small group discussions? What topics would we look at? Rural density. Are we going to keep it the same as it is? Are we expanding any new commercial or industrial areas? The Lake Drive District, the map, let's go back to that color map, and you look at Lake Drive, whoops, I'm sorry. That's not on that map. I'll show you that coming up.
No, this one shows it, this shows it.
Yes.
All the rezoning we did.
Yes, yes. So if you go a page forward of that, that's dated August 2008. That was still in updating the process. For whatever reason, the original zoning map that was created before the time I came to the community said our commercial industrial district here on Lake Drive is 400 feet deep, except as noted, or that's on the west side of Lake Drive, and 1,000 feet deep on the east side. And it literally bisected everyone's property. And it was extremely problematic. We had already gone through this discussion and debate of our Shoreland Overlay District 2000 by 2008. You can see on this map, it identifies what where the floodplain locations are, excuse me, the shoreland areas. These again are overlays. This was kind of an overlay concept for the zoning districts themselves that bisected property. And it created real problems because a portion of somebody's property was commercial, but another portion wasn't. Well, what can I do with this? Well, those bump outs that you see had occurred at some time prior to that. Somebody came in and said, I want to expand my business. I own all the way out to X. Why am I limited to 1,000 feet? We took this on and described in the comp plan, we're going to change that. And it was kind of an ugly process because there were a lot of residential areas, mainly on the west side of Lake Drive, where people did not like the concept of expanding that commercial or industrial use. In any event, this 2008 map illustrates the horse racing district. Keep going the page after that map, and we've got commercial area expansion. We investigated, should we go on Kettle River Boulevard from Kettle River to Forest Lake on Broadway and create a new commercial area for the very first time. We talked about the Lake Drive commercial area from the freeway district west all the way to Kettle River. And then the third area, we knew we wanted to do this, at least expanding the Lake Drive to match existing legal descriptions. The next page is background information that was generated and used. This one is labeled January 28, a city council workshop. We identified acreages for commercial industrial areas in some of the neighboring communities. And it's just a relationship perhaps to how much is enough or how much is too little, or, where do we go with this? The next page is dated 2009, 2 years after we started this discussion process, and you can read this later. It's a summary of the procedures we went through. How many workshops did we have, Elizabeth? 10?
Yeah.
Public? I mean, several up on Kettle River and
There were
Broadway.
five of those.
And,
There were five of
and
those.
there were separate ones on Lake Drive between the Freeway District and Kettle River, and then we had a whole
Freeway
series of them on
Freeway.
the existing commercial industrial area. And this had some staff conclusions, and then voila, the next page, you got the 2030 comp plan, which was adopted in November 2009. And that, I incorporated the descriptions of our primary residential and commercial, industrial land use designations. You can read those, you can compare those to the 99 plan, see what's happening. The 99 plan said, let's have urban services. This plan says, hey, we got it.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It doesn't include the sewer maps and other things, but there's a land use map in there, which again, was our Bible until we started the update for the now 2040 plan adopted in 2019.
But you'll notice, look at all the square blocks.
Yep.
We squared them out.
That comp plan said, because we knew we were going to change the zoning at that point, the comp plan started it out and said, okay, it's not 400 feet anymore. In a couple of areas, it was less than 400 feet.
Yeah, I just say it was.
Because we followed actual parcel boundaries. You can look at the zoning map, which is now dated May 2010, and the zoning map is consistent. All of our retail districts in the freeway corridor, as well as the horse racing district, match the red commercial designation in the comp plan. The land use, or the light industrial areas, are consistent with that, and our commercial industrial are consistent with Lake Drive. When we knew we were going to update the ordinance after that plan, the next page after these maps started identifying things that were going on that weren't related to mandatory change between the land use plan and the zoning. It was, what other things are going on? Well, animal kennels, nuisance issues, had nothing to do with the comp plan or zoning per se. It just was a zoning issue itself. The freeway corridor district uses. It wasn't a question of the inconsistency, it was reevaluating what do we allow there now and will we change that? Ambient lighting standards, nothing to do with the comp plan, that's a zoning issue. Accessory building standards, nothing to do with the comp plan. Should we allow bigger accessory buildings? Then we had bylaws and appointment policies, building setback standards in the Shoreland District. These are all strictly zoning issues, nothing to do with comp plan consistency. So in 2011, right after that new plan was done, we embarked on a whole lot of changes in here. I'm not gonna go into detail. I'm not gonna talk about the outcomes. We had freeway corridor changes and some recommended standards that followed the original McCombs study. So the retail market analysis done by the McCombs group came up with some recommendations, and these set out some revisions that did take place.
That was the 2009
Pardon?
home study,
2009 was the first McCombs, the update was 2015.
Yep.
And I included some key findings in there, which I want to touch on before we let you go. The next page is the freeway corridor, the interchange itself, the quadrants, and this involved land that the city owned at the time. This map was done by the city engineer. What I did was take the McCombs study, and it was the first time, because we had recently acquired this property, it was taking information out of the McCombs report, our potential based on the limited amount of housing within our area, but the support district for both retail uses within our market trade area, which overlaps into Lino and Hugo and Forest Lake, but it also included destination uses, which include the two big boxes on that map. And that was identifying that you might get a big box type of use or some sort of strip center. And the big box uses fall into the category, even though we allow them in the commercial showroom. If you had a Sam's Club, it's virtually all retail, except their own warehousing that's done internally. So these boxes represented what could fit on the properties the city owned on the basis of the McCombs study, but also what parking requirements were mandatory. So in the northeast corner, as an example, this was before we talked about, it identified the relocation, but well before it happened on Hornsby. This identified that the primary use might be a couple of convenience or restaurants, but you could have up to 120,000 square feet. Nobody's building those anymore. But with all the mandatory parking that goes with that size of building, it would fit on that property. Across the street to the west, we've talked before in some of these meetings, it's an odd parcel. It's hard to get to, but a furniture store, 60,000 square feet with the parking that goes with that, it's an ideal location. Home stores are frequently like that. Next to the freeway, you got to ask for directions to get there. But people aren't building home stores in Schneiderman's anymore. On the south side, that's a common size for a super Walmart, a super Target. They get into those dimensions. That was our mindset when we began marketing this property.
And then the market fell.
And then the market changed. So the 2009 McCombs study, I copied a couple of pages here, talked about the realistic uses that might occur. I was using 2015 market data. So in 2010, when we were working on this, this was the amount that Columbus could have commanded within our community on the basis of that study. So you can thumb through those. This again was using market data for 2015. I have to laugh, so I included what I found after our 2009 plan was done. We started talking about, hold on to your hats, clustering, density transfers, and things of that nature. These were examples that I actually handed out in the 1990s and resurrected for discussions that took place. It's just a concept. If you want to keep your 5-acre standard, you don't have to have your homes all built on that 5 acres. You could distribute them such. It makes better use of wetlands. It ends up having smaller individual lot sizes, but the overall density remains the same. That actually became ordinance. We established that in the rural area, which concept is if you go from 5 acres and allow a minimum 2.5 acre lot somewhere, somebody's got 7.5 acres. If that's all wetland, it's allowable. So let's jump ahead. This is the revised McCombs study, and I copied only what I think is the relevant information. Elizabeth mentioned you can go online and see this. The map on the second page, or behind the cover, is the description of properties that are he was evaluating with some specificity. This does not represent all of the parcels that he is recommending for retail use. He included all the city parcels, he included some other developed ones. He was commenting on what was in our community retail district. And following this, the next page labeled number 7, he goes into a description about all these parcels. This is key for our assumptions about what we want to do with the community retail district. It's shrinking. Once you've taken a portion of it and made it medium density, another portion made it high density. Those eliminate several of these parcels that are on the map. The others he's discounting as you have way too much retail property. And so part of our debate, and there's a table where he's illustrating on the basis of that description, the map and the previous, what our possible uses are. Convenience retail, maximum 350,000. Destination, if you got lucky, 500,000. And it's really helping us say we need some other zoning districts in our freeway corridor. And it's not for you to conclude that you've got to allow undesirable uses. It's just that our category of community retail is not applicable on a lot of these sites. It is not our highest intensity use anymore. It's going to be relegated to not one person's description of service commercial, but what you might come up with as service uses, more daycare businesses, hair salons, things of that nature, but not your primary restaurant entertainment district. When the expert's telling you it's going in this trend, it's not going up in that trend. In 2009, there was nothing that showed us it was doing anything but this, and now it's still going down. Will it come back? We may change all of this in 5 more years if you do another study, but indications are right now you need to focus on less pure retail and come up with more general commercial, service commercial, highway commercial, whatever names you want to apply. We want to go through some sort of exercise with you that gets you thinking about those different uses that fit our market, but might not change your idea that, gee, the concept of commercial showroom was still indoor. It wasn't outdoor. Or you may say, we got to draw the line. We should do whatever. That's a lot to think about. So you can go through and struggle through some of the information that was the summary in that McCombs report, but I tended to include all of this in this packet because that is a guide on where you make some decisions. And then the last is the current comp plan that we're operating on. The map is in there and the
It's
descriptions.
2019.
Yep.
You have 1999. Oh, it really is.
I was writing too fast to get this.
2019.
Yeah, excuse me. That
20
is
years,
the-
it's 20 years later.
Yeah.
I didn't
So-
blink of an eye.
All I had in my computer was the draft cover from 5/31. I want to make sure you knew it was October 23, but yes, it's 20 years later. So the description of our rural residential have modified in these 3 comp plans. We never had mixed use, and so that is a new description that's in here. The commercial industrial is basically the same. There's a little change in the description, but it's a subtle one in the commercial showroom, and the industrial tends to be similar. So again, those are the descriptions. When we look at the land use map, we cannot put any kind of what we're going to label commercial use. We come up with a new name and call it something industrial, and it resembles commercial, but it happens to be down in the purple area, and then you don't have to amend your comprehensive plan. We can have something that starts creeping up out of the purple area into your red area that resembles more industry, but you agree it ought to be maybe highway commercial, and that's what you call it, even though it resembles industry. Those are games you play to not amend your comp plan. So don't get hung up on the name. You could have a Mickey Mouse zoning district, and it just depends on what uses you specify and what purpose you have that guides the ultimate decision. Who's got questions? It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of history. And I think for all of you that have been in the community a long time, you'll find it interesting. This has been a long, arduous task. And compare that then to this events calendar that came out of our annexation effort in 2006. Because it really continues what I didn't copy in the comp plan and zoning stuff. It talks about all of this was a tremendously busy period of time from the day the comp plan was done to when we started getting involved in the detailed planning for the sewer and water district. And there were a ton of meetings on that. And there were a lot of people that wanted this until they got into understanding what the price tag was going to be and that they had to pay for that. It was a big undertaking. Very few communities create sewer and water districts from scratch today like you did. We're talking about expansion of little dinky communities, the Village of Hugo or Centerville, that expand and become a much larger urban region. You got sewer plants in places like Farmington back in the 1980s, Rosemont in the 1980s. There's still private sewer plants out in Cologne, not Waconia anymore, Watertown. They're on the edge and they are distinctly separate, have agriculture separating them from the other urban area. The way the urban area crept up the 35E and W corridor still really hadn't gotten to Columbus until the waste treatment plant and the interceptor was constructed to Forest Lake, which became your opportunity to have regional sewer service. If you had to pay for a wastewater treatment plant in addition to your sewer lines, you'd be dead.
So, thanks, Dean. That was a lot to comprehend. So, I have about 10 minutes, and I know it's 9:30, but I have about 10 minutes to set up your December 18th meeting. So in order to do that, what I want to do is, and I'll try to do as quick as I can. So if we pass these around, what we wanted to do tonight is to kind of give you a fair amount of background, and then a concept plan so that we can actually apply it. What I created for all of you is a worksheet packet, and the idea is that you will work through the worksheet, and then we'll talk about it on the 18th. So the first page is the actual worksheet. So if you look at the very top, and it says the fact, and the fact is that the comprehensive land use plan defines, definitions are the guidance for all the property, in Columbus. Well, if you look at the next page, what I put for you is there's a couple of references. Here it shows how many acres that we have in each land designation. And then the next page, it talks about the definitions, which is also in the back of what Dean put together. But the idea of the first page is, it's the concept as proposed. It's the lawn and snow maintenance company. And the idea is that you're going to walk through and you're going to look at the definitions, and then you're going to look at the evidence. Is it service? Does it meet that requirement? If you think it does, why? And just in a couple of words that you're going to put down. And so what I try to do is look at the concept, and then in the bullet points, use your evidence as to why you think it's commercial or industrial. Because really our designations, we either have commercial, industrial, or we have commercial, industrial, which is But again, you're looking at the concept, which you have the horticulture PowerPoint, and then you have the worksheets. And the idea is each bullet point, you're just gonna put a couple of words, like why do you think it's in the land use? Why do you think that's compatible in the land use? And I think if you work through it, if you have questions, you can call me or Ben, although I take it back. Ben will not be here until the 12th, so if you want to talk to Ben, you gotta wait till the 13th, which is Friday. The idea is after you get your evidence, what's the reason why you're gonna go one way or the other? Why is it not commercial? Why is it industrial? And then really think about why you would do that. Because on the 18th, at the end of the day, we want to give a recommendation, right? You want to give a recommendation to the applicant and/or the council as to why you think it fits the land use plan, why or why not, why do you think it is in the land use plan and in what district? And you already know they want to be in the commercial showroom district. Why do you think it should be or shouldn't be in that district? And the reason why I want you to argue both ways is because I want, you know what I mean, we're going to try to do that both ways. Like, well, do you think it's in that district and why, or you don't think it's in the district, why? Because I think if you look at both sides, you'll see what we do as a staff when someone comes in and we start looking at the districts. Because they're telling us where they want to be, and we're saying, well, no, maybe you really should be over here, or you should look over here, and they're like, no, 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 this is where I want to be, like, right here. Yeah. And those, right.
Those are all questions that we ask.
Well, it's kind of like the horse racing track. I mean, that's where they wanted to be.
And so you created.
We created a district.
And they would be compatible to that district.
And those are all policy issues. So that was the staff coming to the Planning Commission Council and saying, horse track wants to be here, what do you think? And then working through all of these questions. So I tried to tailor a sheet as best I could, and maybe evidence wasn't the best word, but reasonings, and I was trying to think evidence, I mean like clues, like, where along the way do you know what I mean, what evidence are you using that it is or it isn't in the land use plan? And then the bottom part of it is trying to put a recommendation together. In other words, you heard the concept, summarizing, because the question is, which land use designation best fits the concept as presented, which is the landscape and the landscape and snow removal guide. And what's your justification? What's your evidence saying? Evidence proving your justification? And what was your reason of doing it? Why did you pick that way? So I'm trying to like lead you down a path saying, okay, if you're going this way, why? Why? Because the land use plan says it could be, this plan says it's okay, this one doesn't. Or, no, it really doesn't go there because, as Dean said, there's outdoor storage, there's nothing else like it. And trying to argue the both ways. That's what we do. In staff meetings, we go around the table. Well, I think it's this. Well, no, it's this. And then the attorney gets in.
Don't be silly.
And then he goes in, then he'll say, don't be silly.
But they're gonna argue, no matter what we say, that we already have vehicles piled up out there as storage.
But that might not be the direction you're going in, and you know what I mean, and maybe your reasoning, maybe it fits the justification, but maybe your future is, you know what, that isn't, you know what I mean, maybe a 10,000 square foot building isn't what you want. And the reasoning why you didn't want it is because, the building should be twice the size, there shouldn't be bunkers worth of, I don't know, rock or whatever it is that they put in the front. I don't know, you can come up with a laundry list of different reasons of why you think it shouldn't. That might be in the other bucket. She wants to be in the community, she wants to be part of the community, I mean, I don't know, that's not really zoning, but sometimes that kind of also kind of comes into play.
But if you argue the outside storage issue, how do you rectify that with all of those RVs sitting out there? I mean, the average person isn't gonna understand the the argument. You guys understand.
Well, not for mini storage.
Oh, no, I thought you guys were speaking of.
Yep, and Gander and Coates are finished product, and so is Ziegler. Ziegler rents finished product. They don't have storage. I mean, that's finished product that they rent. So I agree with you in that matter, but they're gonna say, well, do you really know the difference between a van, you know what I mean, a van that holds a lawnmower and an RV? Are you gonna tell me really that that's a lot different in sitting out in the parking lot? Or visible. So those are the things that you have to think about in your reasoning and your justification, because this is you saying, okay, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, they've given me all these facts, and now I've read the definitions, and now I've looked at the zoning district definition. What I didn't give you is the uses. I think you're familiar with what the uses are, but I can email those to you also. That's like the next rung down, land use, zoning, and then you know what I mean, start looking at the use list. But then we're gonna come back, so my questions from Dean and I were, we've put worksheets together, but what else do you want to see on the 18th from us to have this roundtable discussion? Because I think what we want to do is we want to go through and have a discussion on the worksheets, and what you discovered and what you think and what you want to talk about in this. And then the last pages are about zoning districts. And this is what Dean was saying, the 2004 one is very close to what's today. In 2001, the EDA hired a consultant to work with all of us to create a new zoning map, because we wanted something to jump off of, because at the time we only had FDA and FDB. And this is the chart that they came up with, and I've given you a copy of that chart. Not because we want to, you know what I mean, copy it, but I wanted to show you that 20 years ago, this is what that company came up with as land use designations. I've given you I actually dug up the definitions of the districts. These are my numbers, by the way, and I only had one copy because, believe it or not, in 2001, there was nothing digital. I actually had to look through my books to find these maps, and I only had one copy. So this was the definition page that came with this map. So it was light industrial, general commercial, highway commercial. Notice it's mixed residential. It's very close to what we have today. I don't know where that park came from, but we'll have to tell Taro he now has put in a park. The mixed use along or Zerk Street, it's all wetland. That is non-usable, so you can just cross that off. And where the mixed use is, guess what? That's where prime preserve is today. So there are some things that actually came to fruition, and this is not the zoning map we adopted. The zoning map we have is the commercial, community retail, commercial showroom, and light industrial. So what I thought was that you can kind of look at this and we can start to think about zoning districts, which was what Dean closed with, which is how many do we need? Do we need sub-districts? If we have sub-districts, what would they be? And this was just to start to get you thinking about what we should have as far as that goes. So I filled up my 10 minutes. So looking at the 18th, we'll spend time on the worksheets. I'm assuming that the services would be back, because I think they're going to be looking for direction. And so we'll come up with a recommendation. Anything else you want to do in that time frame, or you think that's going to be enough for the 18th?
Five people in with 5 different worksheets, that's a lot of discussion.
What kind of revenue, tax revenue would a horticultural service provide?
You know, in this particular case, it's going to really depend on the size of the building, which here, I think you said 10,000 square feet or so. That's a very small building. That is not a lot of tax revenue. Because although they said tip-up panel, that's a very, you know what I mean, high end, so that's, you know, $60 to $65 a square foot. It's similar to Bear Homes building. Although Bear Homes is not tip-up, that's a concrete panel building. I'm trying to think of tip-up panel building in Columbus. North Pine Aggregate is on Lake Drive is tip-up. The Accent building going north, that's a tip-up panel building. So it's an expensive building, but it's not a brick building. And it's small. So one of the things I think you all should think about, because Dean and I and the mayor have been talking about this, you do not have a minimum building standard in the commercial district. So if they came in and said, we're gonna build a 2,000 square foot building, you know, there's nothing to say that, now, in the residential district, you have a minimum standard of a house footprint. We don't have anything, so I think that's something we should talk about.
You've spent a lot of money establishing sewer and water in here, and when you have too many large, extensive land uses, we're never gonna hit the ultimate capacity that was planned for this area, nor are we gonna get the tax revenues when you've got 80% or 95% outside storage and 5% building. But that's also not, as Elizabeth said, we have standards for maximum floor area ratio. It can't exceed 1 square foot of building to 1 square foot of land, but we don't have a minimum. We have maximum lot coverages, typically 50% here in this commercial area. You can't have more than 50% lot coverage, building and parking, but we don't have minimums. And in this instance, and I think, you know, I don't want to speak for the mayor, but some of the language here, you know, relates to you want to cater to property owners. In this case, you obviously got a willing seller. Is it the highest and best use? That's a whole different debate and discussion. If this were a clear, specific use allowed in the comp plan and in the zoning ordinance, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
And it is.
It's in
If
the
they
wrong,
came in
maybe in the
buying
wrong
a piece
district.
of property in the CI district, and they would
If I could relate to a comment that Jody made. Earlier I said, when you have something that comes in the community and you really like it, it's real easy to amend your ordinance. You know, if there's no controversy, it's a win-win. You got jobs, you got good tax base, no trucks, whatever. You'll amend your ordinance in a heartbeat. Jody said something to the effect about, what if you considered changing the zoning? We haven't talked about spot zoning. Spot zoning is when you create something that's all by itself, just one parcel, and it isn't really described in the comp plan or elsewhere in the ordinance. We have to avoid that. But let's say for a moment you thought from the light industrial district all the way up to freeway mini storage, you wanted it, we'll call it commercial, so it fits the comp plan. you couldn't just take that one parcel and change it. So if you were thinking in your own minds, maybe we come up with an alternative zoning use between Ziegler and Freeway Mini Storage. The problem is, they're at the north end. You're going in the wrong direction. If they had picked a parcel right next to light industrial, so it's down here instead of way up here, it would be easy to say, oh, that's where our new highway storage commercial district is going to be. Still commercial, but when they're at the north end and you want to change that concept, then you're literally saying everything between light industry and that is whatever category you're creating. Otherwise, that's called spot zoning. We don't do that. It's against the law. It is a state law, no spot zoning.
Going all the way down, you'd have to dedicate it
Right.
that whole.
So they not only picked the wrong district, but they weren't close to the other type of district where you might say, if you were here or there. So part of that debate is you don't want to say, can't you find something down in this area? Your rationale leads to that conclusion. This is better suited here. It's up to them to find a willing seller where that might be. Or if it got to, can't we change the zoning? Keep in mind that northernmost parcel is the worst one to start with. You're going to create uses that are more similar to industry. They need to be next to industry, and they're the last parcel away from industry.
But it doesn't mean that when we're looking at it, when you're looking at this, if you say, you know what, I think this business should be there, it doesn't mean that we can't carve out a district within there and change the zoning. If you think if you think the land use is right, you're a commercial business. You know what I mean? You think the land use is right and the description is right, and then you decide, you know what? I think this zoning district, Dean was right. There's no more big box. There's no more Costco's coming. What are we going to put here? Should this type of business be there? Should we be looking for other similar businesses? Is this really a general commercial? I don't know. I don't remember what the definition was. Those are things we're going to have to start to think about. Did you like that business? Did you like what she had to say? Should it go there? Should it not go there? So today, you can look at the code and then decide, yes, I want it, and make that reasoning for that, or no, I don't think it should be there. I think it should be elsewhere because I want to save that district for buildings that are 50,000 square feet, and I'm going to get a lot of tax revenue. So you do have options. You're not locked into the zoning, and you're not locked into commercial showroom. That's the whole point of what we're doing. We talked about this for 18 months, 2 years, well, 18 years ago. And then the last comp plan, we kind of left them. But now's our opportunity. If we want to change things, we can. So you have options. It's just in this time frame, when they come in this time frame and we're in the flux, it's hard for me because I'm like, well, we're doing a comp plan and you don't quite fit. And I don't know what the future's going to bring. And they're like, well, I want to buy it now. I'm like, well,
It'd be really easy, Black.
so what they're up against is they're renting and their lease ends in 2021. So they need to buy a parcel, get building plans, build a building, and move by December 31st of 2020. So that's why they're starting now, because they know that they have a year to figure that out. Now, could they rent a building for another year? They probably could, but that's not their business plan. That's not what they want to do. So,
I'd add, even if you concluded that maybe we need to add this type of concept, I think when you really evaluate it and talk about performance standards, you would immediately say, what is the difference between Freeway Corridor and Lake Drive. It is, those are large sites, they have private utilities. We don't really care if they underutilize those properties. And a little bit facetiously. But in the freeway corridor, while you may conclude that that use has merit in that location, having 5% of the site building and 95% storage probably isn't. So while they might meet the use test, they might not meet what your performance standards are. I don't mean the type of the building, not the design, but the appropriate use of land that has sewer and water available. That's part of your thought process. That's for all this entire district, not just this user or that property. The mayor came up to give us
Yeah.
blessing at the end.
Mr. Chair. Elizabeth,
Yep.
is there an easy way for you to get everyone to help us understand the taxable value chart that you showed me?
Yeah, I mean,
Which goes to my point, or what Dean just said. So they put a outhouse on there and a filter parking lot. What does the city got out of it? $20,000 a year? That's nothing. If you put a nice big building on Lake Andrew, you would get 200, something like that. We have, and besides, if you notice, that piece of property he wants to buy is 20 acres. 12 acres is wetland, it's unusable. Every piece of property on there, both sides, is mostly unusable. So for the financial value to Columbus, we have to really consider what size building we're gonna put on it, because we do not have an excess of property anyway. They took half of what we thought was city property, and turned that into wetland. All of Trout Air became wetlands. Most on the other side of Hornsby Street is wetlands, they just don't know it yet. I mean, our biggest problem in Columbus is we don't have enough commercial business area to provide taxes. But anyway, on that chart you showed me, I started to understand.
Yep.
So how can you simplify that, make us all understand?
I have to get it updated. But then I can bring that back on the 18th and we can go over it.
Because whether you like her idea for helpers having barbecues and all that, what does it take? That's the big thing about, that's what the city is for.
What Jesse was talking about, I had Tammy put together a chart normalizing across the zoning districts based on X amount of acres, what brings in the biggest tax base. And she went across all different, 6 different uses, and from apartments to industrial, and then she showed what tax base, where you get your most bang for your buck in tax base. And it just shows you how that is derived. And it kind of goes through, it's a worksheet. But
But that's good information for people like us to have.
it's 6 years old, so it's gotta be
I
updated.
want us to be careful when this comes back at the next meeting, that part of the rationale in land use and zoning in making your decision is based upon those two things. It isn't the financial equation. So I want to caution you from saying, well, gee, if you only had a little bigger building and a little bigger tax base, we like the idea of your employees, but they leave all day, they're not going to eat lunch here even. That's not part of your debate. Your debate is by the book. You're gonna-
Because if a business fits in to the zoning and land use, legally, do you have ground to stand on to say no? I mean, you do always, I'm sure, but they
No, you
can't.
don't always.
No,
Okay, I mean, they can't.
no, you don't.
You will
If they
find,
fit in, it doesn't matter what their tax base would be, but if they meet all the other criteria fitting on that piece of property in
Yes.
that area,
Yes.
we have to say. Right.
Yes.
and
Meet your
what the mayor and Elizabeth are talking about right now is what we haven't done in 20 years is any kind of analysis like this, to where instead of having maximum lot coverage, maybe you have minimum lot
Right.
coverage. That's a new standard. And to let one potential use go by where a year from now you may have concluded, boy, that was a close one, we could have really underutilized this property. That's not part of your analysis. We don't have that in any of these standards right now.
But part of this whole thing is changing those standards.
That is
to-
correct.
To put those into place so that we can make the
And
decisions on it.
what Shelley was saying earlier, can't we, that's exactly what I wanted to do at the next meeting, start equating different things in the specific language of uses, or you have to build up performance standards. But when you talk about this particular project, this particular property, stick to what
Because we're
is.
in the same boat as we would be with anybody else, I mean, even the bill was before we passed the thing. Right. This is what we have to work with. We have not changed anything.
Correct.
So we have to work with what is written now.
Don't go outside the realm of the zoning
I have a
ordinance.
question back there.
So what happens if you have, not just this, but coming in to, apply for a permit, and it's going to be in an area where we know the zoning is not harmonious with the land use?
And
You
you
can't use it then,
want it or you don't want it?
and say either. I mean,
Oh.
the fact is that you can't use the zoning in that case because the land use trumps zoning. And we know that when we change some of the land use, that invalidates the zoning if we haven't gone through to make those changes yet.
And you know what they'll say? Well, you have no criteria, so I guess I can do anything I want. And that's what, and they would come in and Bill would say, yeah, I think they're right.
So there's an alternative to buy time, and it's the same thing you did with the, or with the billboards, and you establish a moratorium.
Exactly.
Do you want to put the community on hold while you think this out? Probably not. You have to evaluate what are the risks if somebody comes in. I'll tell you the worst thing, and that is you could have a nonprofit or a public use that's tax exempt taking over the best piece of property. We'll never be able to do anything about that. Church could come in here if it's an allowable use, and we have to be careful that we don't discriminate churches. We've got several, but they're not a use allowed anywhere in the freeway corridor. And so far, your attorney said that's fine. But that's a worse potential use of property, because you're providing all the services, including police and fire, and they ain't paying a nickel. But part of where I want to go in the next meeting, before you get deluged with things, is to carry on the very notion of what other standards are missing, like, do we need to have minimums for the first time, similar to your minimum floor plan for a single-family home or business? It's part of this debate. We don't want to be rushed. But to answer somebody's question earlier, somebody walks in and it's black and white allowable, we're not stopping it. And you can't impose a moratorium after you have an application. That's against the law. So the only way to totally protect yourself is say, well, we're not going to allow anything in the freeway corridor until we get this done. And that's not practical either. You'd be passing up some things that are home runs, real winners. You don't want to lose them, but get rid of the good with the bad.
Now in subdivision, if they meet the conditions, you don't have a lot of latitude in subdivision.
Because really what we do is the fact finding. I mean, that is, and that's based on the comp plan and our ordinances. Correct?
Correct. And when you get a report, it's got findings of fact.
Yep.
And then it's got recommendations. Whoever asked before, can you? Of course you can. If you don't like a particular finding and it's substantially inconsistent with what you're seeing in the ordinance, whether it's debating, is that really retail? That is always fair game. You got to bring that up. And again, I think part of any kind of miscommunication, first of all, I haven't been here in 6-9 months, and hadn't worked with any of you, and it was unfair, and let's talk about Viking again. There wasn't a soul at the public hearing, no neighbor, nobody. Ron gets done, he looks around the room, and somebody made a motion to approve it. It wasn't even an opportunity to maybe put an issue on the table and debate it. It was like, well, why don't we go ahead? That's not your fault. I mean, I'm not pointing at you. It's not the planning commission's fault. It is just, when you don't have a controversy surrounding it, you know, why should you do anything?
But then it was accepted by the city council as well, right? Viking?
No, they actually, when it got to the city council, they continued it for 2 weeks. And then we had a roundtable with Anoka County, and there was a little bit more discussion on alternate routes and what we were gonna do long-term planning. So there was a little bit more, but it was delayed until that meeting happened, and then we brought back the information. And then there were conditions that were added, and I don't remember all the conditions that were added. Oh, and they changed the building elevations. And they updated those, and so there was a few things that came from that delay, that 2-week delay. What were you gonna say, Janet?
Is maximizing. Basically says
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair question, and
You can
that,
change it, but that way at least if you kind of create a pause, that you do some latitude to say, maybe we don't want to consider that at this point in time, we want the bigger picture.
I think in terms of what's happened in the freeway district in the 25 years that I was a part of it, especially establishing the sewer and water district, it was a very transparent public effort. Even though, and this is for planning commissioner or council benefit, we don't have to notify people when we amend the text of the zoning. There's no notification requirement. So if you want to be less than transparent, you go in and all we do is publish a public hearing, but there's no mail notice. Anytime we change the actual map, you have to go 350 feet. Anybody abutting that? Just so you are aware. So a text amendment might go undetected. Is that a wise thing to do? I know you weren't suggesting that we do it maliciously or anything like that, but sometimes we forget what is the impact of somebody that's paying assessments for 20 years, and now we've put in a standard that might eliminate the sale of their property.
Yeah.
It's for you as the decision makers. It could be a terrible blow, but when we talk about the good of the community, are we interested in 4,000 residents and 6,000 parcel owners, or are we interested in one person who objects to this language in our ordinance because it affects them personally? That is the biggest question, the needs of the many versus the one. And that comes up in every community I work with, and that's just a personal thing. The loudmouth is going to be the one that you've tied their hands a little bit. The rest of the people may not understand this. You don't have a lot of people that come to your meeting because your tax rates are low, and people, over the course of the time that I've been here,
It was a bad topic.
I'll bring mine to the next meeting and you'll never bring
Yeah,
yours.
we're not used to it.
And we didn't build a new house.
Well,
Yeah.
I haven't gotten that one yet. Anyway, I just so you know, you can amend the text with hardly any consequence other than what was the purpose of it. Somebody owns property next to freeway mini storage like this one, and you eliminate mini storage. And here they thought they had it sold to either the current mini storage owners or somebody else that wanted to compete. They all have an impact. And all I can say is, as a part of this process, we'd like to have the luxury to notify people. when we updated this comprehensive plan, we literally mailed notice to every landowner in the freeway corridor to tell them, we may be considering changes. And there were a lot of people that attended those meetings, and some of the outcomes reflected some of that input, but then 6 months later, the council kind of reversed things to make more commercial property and less industrial.
Reminds me, Janet pointed out, one of these maps is wrong. So, the second, I thought I was getting a blow up of the land use map, and this is not the most current land use map, so disregard that one. Use the first one. This is the map that, when we got the no letter from Met Council, this was the one that went to Met Council and then was amended. So that is not the current one. I was trying to get you a blow up because sometimes it's hard to see the parcels in the bigger map, and I took the wrong one.
Question with the text change in that. If this company was in
Second
the
one.
same color, if they had already put in, or any company put in an application,
Nope.
and once that process is started, they kind of, more like grandfather in to complete their process, you have to do it.
Yeah,
So, zoning amendments, comp plan amendments, or moratorium to consider such things cannot be imposed on an application that's been received. They're exempt from it.
And this company, the horticulture, they're planning on putting one in or just looking for direction on the acreage?
Well, I kind of, as the zoning administrator, I have some ability to make calls, you know what I mean, on interpretation. So when I make a call on interpretation, if someone doesn't like my interpretation, they can appeal it, and they can appeal it to the council. That's kind of how it works. In this case, I said, I looked at the code, I looked at what we were doing, I knew where, we were going. This to me was on the border, you know what I mean, of what do you call it, what they were describing to me. Because I didn't have a proposal until 8 days ago. I didn't have a proposal either. So you have a realtor that's coming in, and we're going to do this, and it's this and that. And so you have an idea of what it was. And I was like, well, I'm not sure it really fits. So why don't you do a concept plan? Because a concept plan, you'll have the planning commission and council tell you whether you fit. So I have told them, you know what I mean, as a zoning administrator, that I'm not going to make the call. And so then that's why they're anxious, because they want to be there, and now they're waiting for the call. And that's why you had the brokers here, because they're going to lobby one way, saying, oh, sure, they fit, and not. And so one of the reasons for the concept plan is to give feedback saying, yes, I think you fit, or no, I don't. These are the reasons why your building's too small. It gives them an idea of what you think is wrong with their application or what is good with their application.
But right now, we're going to
And I was just gonna say, it's things that I, you know what I mean, I make notes of, like when I look at the code, I'm like, building too small, this and that, you know what I mean, that, yes, you're right, isn't enforceable at this point. But I do make those notes, because I'm like, well, the goal of the corridor is not to use a very small piece of the property, it's to maximize the use of the property, and we're not doing that at this point. So in this particular case, I told them, and they were willing to come through the concept, which I already put them on notice. I'm like, I'm not making a call, I'm not telling you it is, you know what I mean, allowed in that district now, because I'm not sure of the fit.
It's like the event center when they.
Yeah, when I'm not really sure, I have, you know what I mean, reservations, then I usually say you need to come through the concept. Now, early on, I got this feeling that everyone was uncomfortable with that, because you didn't really know a whole lot about it. But it is a good tool to give you some measure of what's in the code and whether or not you really want this. And it gives them a measure, like, oh, I shouldn't really put I shouldn't put earnest money down, or I shouldn't do things Because why would they pay $80,000 to do due diligence only to have all of you say no? That's, to me, that's really hard on a business. Alrighty.
No, this was good information. Especially with having this in front of us to look at.
Yeah, the timing was perfect to fit in with how we were trying to get you participating in how this is done. It worked out well. Elizabeth did a great job of putting this together at the last minute.
Oh, very good. Well, what else you have to do at 6 o'clock in the morning?
What's next?
Where are we going here?
Public open forum.
Anybody want to get up? I do have a question for public forum. Can I- Yeah, real quick. Who do I see on plowing the second part of the park up there by the tennis court? I know that is that a policy? It is.
The park board, we talked about this, whether or not we were gonna do both trails, and the park board said, that they would, only do the south side, but that was years ago. I mean, I think it could be brought up again, you know what I mean, if,
We meet in January.
Well,
You know what I mean,
if we
if
got
that's the case.
if we had a petition, I could get 100 people saying there's one guy out there with skis. And that's why this is the rumor I heard, that he's, that's for cross-country skiing. Up on it. That's the rumor going around out there.
well, I'd have to check, I don't know about that rumor at all. I knew early on, we didn't have a plow truck that would fit the, you know what I mean, trail, and we weren't going to snow blow the trail.
So what do we do? Go to the park board, or do we go to the council, or do we go to you?
No, I would say go to the council, and, you know, when you're doing the park, or the planning commission
just
report.
slide that in there?
And slide that in there,
Okay,
and then they can put it on the agenda for their January meeting.
okay, all right. Anybody else want to say anything? Public forum, all right, it's closed. Look, where are we going now? City administrators report.
I don't have anything further.
I'm wondering, I got November.
Oh, jeez.
Well,
Somebody
okay.
give them an accurate one.
Yeah, I'll be at the next council meeting.
Yep.
And
should
anybody
be-
else got anything to say? Anybody want to adjourn this meeting?
Yes.
Oh, just one.
No.